Hi everyone, long time no see. There is obviously a good reason for that. One is that I've been away on holiday and done those sort of things, had a little bit of time away from YouTube creation. But the other one is that I'm only these days doing these breakdowns on the Super 750s and the 1000s and the major team events, and we haven't had one for a month. So that's the simple reason as to why you haven't seen me in a while. I've got quite a lot of potential projects coming out, so it could be quite a busy period for the channel over the next month or two. And obviously we have in August we have the World Championships, where I'll be doing a preview and a prediction video, and of course a breakdown as well. And I've got a couple of other projects on the go, so if you've been missing the video uploads on this channel, then don't worry, there's plenty to come in the coming months. Like I said, welcome to this week's episode of Beckman's Breakdown, the show where I take a look at all of the BWF World Tour events, Super 750 and Super 1000 level, including the majors and the team events. This week, I'm actually doing a double header episode, 2 tournaments in one video. I did this last year, and the reason for it is that every summer I go to Indonesia. My wife's from there, and so we always head back there for a few weeks, and it generally coincides with the Japan Open and the China Open. Well, it certainly did last year, and it's done so again this year. So obviously I wasn't in a position to do a breakdown video directly after Japan, but I did watch a lot of it. In fact, I probably watched a little more of the badminton than I did when I'm usually at home and I've got other work commitments. Every single afternoon, I would sit down, watch a number of matches, and obviously catch up on a lot of matches through highlights and extended highlights, etc., etc. So the amount of badminton I watched, the amount of notes I took, was quite lengthy. The document I made in terms of notes for this is thousands of words, multiple pages, and even the document I created to kind of plan this episode is pretty long. There is a lot to get through, lots of interesting things, and like I said at the start, with the World Championships only a month away, these events could have had an impact or could give us some indication into how those World Championships might play out. Although on that note, I did wonder before both these events got underway whether or not we might see lots of interesting results, as some players could be targeting the later events. It's not just the World Championships next month. For Asian players, they also have the Asian Games in September, a huge tournament that only comes around every 4 years, and it's a big one for them to win. So maybe some players took small breaks before the Japan and China Open. I know of a couple that did. And then also you throw in the other kind of question, or the balancing act for these players is, are they training through these events? I know they're 750s, and I know China Opens 1000. It's a big tournament, but with those two even bigger tournaments further down the line, have some of the players trained through it and possibly wouldn't have done as well because of that. And then again, if I just add even more of a layer to this, it's always a tricky one, because some players are quite good. They're able to train through the events. They don't mind if they don't do as well, because they know where the goal lies. They know how their body's going to react, and they can peak a little later. But some players, and even those ones I just mentioned, if you do lose, it can knock your confidence. So it's always, for me, a balancing act. Is you want to train hard, you need to give your body enough time to prepare for, you can't peak 1 month after another. It's very, very difficult to do that. You might be able to peak, say last month we had the Indonesia Open, you might be able to peak for that one, but then to peak again, you probably would need at least 2 months. It's very difficult to sustain a very high level of fitness and a very high level in your game. When I'm saying that, I'm talking about being at your absolute best. You can still be pretty good, and some of the players that did well, they don't need to be at 100% to do really well. So it was, for me, heading into both these tournaments, I had a lot of question marks over certain players. There's also others that had been carrying injuries last month, so whether or not they'd actually be fully fit purely because of that. Like I said, lots of things that I wanted to kind of keep an eye on. And I think we got not necessarily answers to those questions, but certainly I could see a lot of that in a lot of the matches that I watched. Now, as there is so much to talk about, I have been thinking how to structure the episode, and I've decided to do it as follows. I'm going to go through each discipline at a time. I'm going to go one discipline at a time. I'm not going to do like the Japan Open, then the China Open. I'm going to go through mixed doubles, then women's doubles, then men's doubles, then women's singles, and then men's singles. And at the end, I will do some Q&A questions. I did ask for your questions, and you've outdone yourselves again. You put in plenty of cool questions. A lot of them were kind of ones that I was going to answer anyway. So throughout all of the, as I go through each discipline, there might be, I probably would have answered some of your questions because I did sprinkle them into my notes to ensure that I talked about them. But anything that was left out or anything that might need further discussion, I've saved that for the Q&A. Because I am doing disciplines all at once, and I'm going to be talking about this player here, that player there, I will be chopping and changing between the Japan Open and the China Open, but I'll try to make it as clear as possible which tournament I am talking about. It is going to be a long episode, so make yourself comfortable. Get a cup of tea or coffee or whatever you fancy. Get some snacks. Or if you're driving, some people, I mean, I do this with YouTube videos. I just listen to the audio in the background, and I'm sure there's quite a few people that are in the same boat. So if you've got a long train journey or a long car journey, plug in those earphones and you can sit back knowing full well that you're going to be hopefully entertained by me for the next, I'm not going to put a guess, but I'm going to guess it could be on for a couple of hours, if not a few hours. So with that longer than usual intro out of the way, let's get into this, and I'm going to start with the mixed doubles. More specifically, I'm going to look at the Chinese mixed doubles because, as we know, China are very strong in the mixed doubles discipline. They've got the two top-ranked pairs in the world. They've got another pair, and they've got plenty of younger pairs below that. I'm going to focus on the three main ones that most people know of. That's Feng Huang, Wang Dongping, Zhan Zhengbang and Wei Yaxin, and Guo Chen and Cheng Fang Wei. Starting with Feng Yanze and Wang Dongping, they reached two finals in the 2 weeks. They won the Japan Open, and then they lost in the final of the China Open to their compatriots Guo Jinhua and Cheng Fang Wei. Now, it was obviously quite an important set of results for this Chinese combination, because just a month ago in Singapore and Indonesia, they had a woeful time. They didn't do particularly well. They lost to Jimmy Wong and Cheng Su-yin of Malaysia and Singapore. And then I can't actually remember off the top of my head who they lost to in Indonesia, but it was two early exits by their standards. And not just the fact they lost early. There was a lot of clear frustrations from both players, especially from Wang Dongping. I mentioned that in my breakdown on both those tournaments. She just seemed to get so agitated so easily. I think frustrations boiling over possibly within herself, maybe her partner too. They did then, after Singapore and Indonesia, they go to Australia, the Super 500, and did win there, but it might have been that tournament was a little bit weaker and I think more favourable conditions for them. Whatever it was from Australia, though, that clearly did help a little bit, and they built on that. And I was quite impressed with how they played in Japan and China. Wang Dongping has had some criticism laid against her. I think many people, from what I can see online and what people talk to me about, many thinking that she has got a little slow, which is understandable given her age and how long she has been playing at the top of world badminton. But in both these events, I felt her speed was noticeably up. She looked strong and powerful on court, and I think that reflected in how she looked more positive for the vast majority. It could have been those frustrations in Indonesia and Singapore. I know they're more difficult conditions for Feng and Wang. They're not particularly strong, especially Feng and Zhe, in those drifty halls where it's more of a circular drift, where it can go, it's got lengthways and sideways. Japan wasn't too bad on the drift front. China was very bad, but it was in one direction. And I think when it comes to that, this pair aren't too bad at dealing with that. They're not so good when there's lots of drift, circular drift, where the shuttle can move in multiple directions. But I think that, combined with possibly she wasn't at full fitness, frustrations boiled over. She looked much happier. She looked much fitter, much stronger. And I think, most importantly, much faster for the vast majority. I think by the end of the 2 weeks, that level dropped a bit, possible through fatigue. But for me, one example of her speed or her improvements in speed, you can see it all over if you watch it, just her darting in, darting out. She just looks strong. Was in the semi-final of the China Open. She got flicked a few times, but was exceptionally fast onto them and was able to apply pressure. For Feng Huang, like I said, I think he looks far more comfortable in the kind of conditions that we saw at the Japan and China Open, especially Japan, which wasn't as drifty as China. I felt he also looked a little faster and more stable on courts in the final of Japan versus a very well-playing Hong Kong pair of Tang Chunman and Seung Sweat. For me, it seemed like Feng Huang was losing his patience in his attack a little bit. But the most important thing, and this is again where there was a slight difference between the last tour, is that he managed to compose himself and then they ran away with it in the third game. I must say, I also really am a big fan of Feng Huang's backhand mid-court area. He is tall and does cover width really nicely. He's someone that can do a lot of left leg lunges, so non-racket leg lunges out to the backhand side, because he can make himself so big and he can really pierce the gaps from that area, and he can do it from the forehand side as well, and I think he did that exceptionally well against the French pair in the semi-finals of the China Open, where he completely destroyed the French pair's backhand channel and then mixed it up nicely with some center shots. One thing I do think that Feng Huang still looked a little vulnerable in throughout these 2 weeks was his serve. I noted in both his semi-final versus the French pair and the final versus Guo Chen, this is the China Open, is that his serve wasn't great. He often flicked. And now a flick serve can be very effective. I think it's a great variation on the serve. Even though you are technically lifting, it's more like an attacking lift. But when Feng Huang was flicking, I felt a lot of times it was just almost, I think Jill said it, it's more of a high serve than a flick serve. It was just a kind of, he didn't feel too confident. It dipped in and out. There were odd moments where it was actually not too bad, but it did look a little vulnerable. Now, they weren't able to do the double. Losing to Guo Chen, who were on fire in the China Open final. But I think this was still a good 2 weeks for the top China pair. I guess they could be kicking themselves a little bit about losing that China Open final, because they'd never lost to Guo and Chen before. But like I said, I thought Guo and Chen played exceptionally well, to be honest, in that final. And actually, they played very well throughout the tournament. Possible sign of pressure on Feng and Wang's shoulders, I don't know. Now, there's last thing about Feng and Wang. There's 2 huge tests for them this year. I've mentioned it already in this video: the World Championships and the Asian Games. And personally, whilst these 2 results will certainly boost them, it does mean they go into the World Championships, especially having won numerous matches and done pretty well. And I think, I'm not quite sure what the conditions in India are going to be like, because it's going to be a bit different to what it was at the India Open in January, because it's going to be a lot warmer. I don't think India is going to have too much circular drift, which I think will play into their hands a little bit. But I don't think these 2 wins are going to lift their chances massively. It's going to be all about, for me, the mental side, because at the majors they have struggled. The last couple they lost early to was it Christiansen and Boe. They went out, so I think it's going to be quite a test. But you know, better that they got to 2 finals and won one of them than having lost in the earlier rounds. Moving on, Guo Jinhua and Chen Fangwei. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't watch many of their matches from Japan, and also not too many of theirs from the China Open either. I don't know why, because I do really like Guo Jinhua. I've mentioned a few times that he reminds me of a little bit of a combination between Yuta Watanabe and Zhang Jun. I know that might sound like a very odd combination, but he's got that kind of vibe of him. But I felt I watched enough of this pair to play, and I've got 1 or 2 things to say. The big one for me was, did anyone else notice a huge change in Guo Jinhua's approach? I'm talking about since the All England this year. His movement and effort into rallies off the shuttle looked insanely increased. What I mean by that is, yeah, he was quick when he was involved in the rally, when he's the one hitting the shuttle. But if you watch him when, say, Chen Fangwei is more the player, I always talk about players on the shuttle and off the shuttle. So in doubles, if you're hitting the shuttle, you're on it. If you're off it, you're the partner. And a lot of amateur players where they fall away is if they're off the shuttle, they tend to end up game watching. They just kind of like this. They're not really looking to insert themselves, get themselves involved, checking the gaps. But when you are the player off the shuttle, because you're not hitting it, I know it can come at a split-second notice on you, but that's your time. You can actually, you've got even more time to see what's going on, and you need to make moves. And I felt that area of Guo Zhenhua was massively increased from what I saw of him at the All England, and what I can remember when I've watched it in the past, even when he won the All England. I felt that the level of effort and the speed and the intensity that he brought was massively increased. In the final against Feng Huang, he was quite literally all over the court, sometimes over committing forward. I feel like Guo Zhenhua is a little bit like the Wang Chan of the mixed doubles, very skillful and can be impactful, but quite often he seems to be playing it like 80%. He can be quite aloof, but not in China. Maybe it was the home crowd effect. I don't know, but it was incredibly impressive. I absolutely love it. And I think it is really important in mixed doubles these days. The man must be incredibly active, and he must also not be afraid to engage the net. I think all pairs, there are a couple that can break this mold. I think Feng and Wang aren't exactly, they're more of a classical mixed, although Feng and Zhe can come forward, but he's not a natural front player. He's a little bit tall to be so good there. But most others, I'm seeing the man being really willing to come forward and trying to dominate from that area. But to be able to do it, and to do it well, it does require a very strong female player who can play the rear court. And I think Cheng Fenghui certainly seems to have stepped up in those sides of things, certainly in China. Another interesting thing about Chen Fenghui, I was curious watching them play, especially in the final, as to whether she could hold it together. Because if you remember at the All England, I believe they played Jaquel and Delru, and they were in a commanding position. They looked like they were going to put themselves, they were going to win that match, and then she completely crumbled. And I did wonder whether the same might happen in China, but it didn't. She was great throughout. Now, I think the difference in that China Open final, what won it for Guo Chen, because it was a very great, it was a really close match. I think the first two games were insanely tight, and then the third was close, but it did open up a little bit. And I just think Guo Chen got onto the attack far more in the third. They seemed to get stronger and stronger, whereas Feng Yanzhe and Wang Dongping dipped ever so slightly. All four players were jumping on the net, but in the end it was Guo Chen that came out better a little bit more often. And that's when it's in those close matches, and you're going to hear me say this in a few other matches as well, it's not necessarily always like one player really won the net and the other player really lost it. It can be so close. It could be like 50.1 to 49.9, but that could be the absolute difference between winning and losing those kind of battles, especially in the hall like China, where one end was quite difficult to play. In that final, I do think actually that Guo Zhenhua and Chen Fenghui should have won it in two. I think Guo went a little bit over the top on his attack, but that is being said in hindsight. He probably needed to play that way. And to be honest, that approach was a factor in them ultimately winning. So yeah, I absolutely loved Guo's intensity. His forehand mid-court is exceptional. His backhand one is good, but it's his forehand one. He loves to play things on that forehand. He's diving onto shots. And I was also impressed with Chen Fenghui's coverage of the court and a consistency of level throughout the final. And the final Chinese pair I want to talk about is Zhang Zhangbang and Wei Yaxin, the world number twos. They had a slightly less than stellar couple of weeks out there in Japan and China. 2 quarterfinals. Not terrible, as they did lose the two pairs who either reached the final of the event or won. I think they lost to Tang Man and Saying Sweat in Japan, who reached the final, and they lost to Guo Zhenhua and Cheng Fenghui in China. But for me, it was not the best performance from the world number 2 pair. It is possible that this might be due to having not played all too much together. As I think following the All England, China did split them, and especially at the Singapore and Indonesia, Wei Yaxin was playing with a different partner, and I think Zhang Zhangbang didn't even play. I'm not sure whether he was having an injury or his partner, who he was supposed to play, had an injury. I can't quite remember, but he hasn't played all too much since the All England. They did play in Macau, and they won in Macau, actually, a Super 300 in June, but the level of that event was certainly down. And I think against the best opposition in the world, they seemed to be a little bit off pace. Their defense looked shaky. They seemed to be getting in each other's way a little bit more often than usual, and I just felt whenever I watched them, they were rarely in full control of situations. When they play really well, it's generally when they're attacking, because Jiang Bang is one of the most athletic players in mixed doubles. They're exceptionally good. When they're forced on the defense, they actually do have a very strong defense, I think, when they're playing well. But if they're forced to play things from below tape, especially Jiang Bang, there are some weaknesses. And I feel like they were getting put into those situations quite a lot. And I also just felt that there was a lot of moments where they weren't playing particularly smart badminton. One example was actually at the China Open, they played against Chen Tangji and Clarissa San, a new partnership. And Clarissa, I'll talk about them actually. I'm going to talk about them a bit more, but very inexperienced at this level. And so you would think that a tactic would be, let's focus all our efforts on Clarissa. Let's apply huge pressure to her. But in that match, for a vast majority, they played a lot onto Chen Tangji. I was watching it going, yeah, of course, you can't avoid one player all the time, but I felt like they played to him way too much, or more than they should have done. So for me, I just don't think they felt comfortable. They weren't thinking clearly, etc., etc. They really struggled, I think, with control in Japan against Tang Sweat, who did a great job of padding it down into the mid-court and getting Zhang to play those shots from below tape that I just mentioned. Not just below tape, but below tape without too much pace. The Hong Kong pair then attacked well, and when Jiang Wei are in good form, their defense is strong, but it looked vulnerable. If you combine this with the fact they just made simply too many errors on tack, for me, they actually looked just like a pair who hadn't played enough and were just struggling. Maybe they can use these tournaments similar to Feng and Wang did in Singapore and Indonesia to just get back into things, get a few matches. They managed to at least get a bit of time on court, and it might help them in the preparation for Worlds. We will have to see if they can, but right now I am not all too confident in them repeating last year at the Worlds, where they reached the finals. Moving on from China to Malaysian mix, because there's two pairs for Malaysia that I want to talk about. The first one I've already kind of mentioned, and that is Chen Tangji and Clarissa San. So Chen Tangji is the current world champion, but he's not playing with his regular partner, Toei Wei, because she is out injured with an ACL injury. I think she's had a surgery and she's on the long road to recovery. I wish her nothing but the best. And so Chen Changji has been partnered with Clarissa, although I think at the Asian Games she'll be partnering Cheng Su-yin, who's one half of a partnership I will talk about in a second. I had never heard of Clarissa before. And I guess it's probably for good reason, as before these events, she was either playing challenge or series events, or she played one Super 500, I think, and that was the qualifications, and it was her home event, the Malaysia Masters. It was, as Malaysian head coach Rexy Meineke said, throwing her in the deep end. It certainly was. She went from playing challenge and international series tournaments to suddenly playing 750s and 1000s with the world champion. That's quite a difficult thing. I can imagine the pressure on her shoulders was quite high, and I have to admit, I felt she did a rather admirable job. I thought she played very well in what must have been a difficult situation. The pressure of playing with the world champion must be quite something. What I also liked about this pair, but also about Clarissa specifically, was that in China, I felt she lifted her level from Japan. She clearly took lessons from Japan and immediately implemented them into China with her and with her and Che Tangji. Almost beating Zhang Xinbang and Wei Yaxin. They certainly had their chances. I loved how they clapped hands in between points. They seemed to have a good synergy. And I get the feeling that Chen Tangji was very supportive in his role. Now, I must admit, like I already said, I was a little surprised by this partnership. I felt that if it was temporary and looking to lift a younger player, then why not someone like the Asian junior champ Liu Yu, sorry, who won the Asian junior mixed doubles and is touted as the next big thing. There's a few other players as well that potentially Malaysia could have partnered Chen Yu with, but you know, maybe the coaches have some sort of plan, or maybe they see potential in Clarissa and just wanted to give her this small chance. Like I said, in Japan, she looked a little off pace. She didn't seem too strong in her backhand, and if she was moved around the back, she was a little slow. But in China, I didn't notice as much, but I must say that might have been because Jiang Wei seemed to play more towards Tang Ji. I already mentioned that. So yeah, no, one thing I did notice about Clarissa in that match against Jiang Wei is that I felt that she does what Tou Wei kind of does, and I'm not sure if this is something that's coached to the Malaysian women's players. Is she darts forward quite a lot onto the net? Now I know in mix especially, you really want to get on top of the net, and you know you have split seconds to make decisions, so sometimes you are going to come forward at the wrong times. But I felt there's a few situations where she kind of darted forward when their opponents were a little deeper and they can kind of push in at her a little bit faster, and she got caught out by that. I've mentioned that with Tou Wei a few times. I can remember a match in Indonesia where the Danish pair of Christiansen and Boe did quite well at exploiting that. Tou Wei is like commits forward and they just nudge it slightly in at her shoulder, and then she kind of misses it rather than kind of holding her ground and then stepping in once she sees that. But again, these are decisions that you have to make at a split second. And so you're inevitably going to get some wrong. I just noticed that she did it a little more, or she did it at times where I felt that she could have just taken half a step back, left a little bit of room that she could still swallow up incredibly quickly. But if they did push her, she would also be there to do it. I hope that makes sense. So let me reiterate it one more time. I think that you can dart into the net. Of course, you're always going to take risks and gambles, especially in doubles. You have to make these split second decisions, and you have to be willing to get them wrong quite a lot. You can't give too much space to the best pairs in the world. But I feel that one good time is if your opponent's quite low and relatively tight, that's one time you can certainly come in. If they're in an okay position and a little bit deeper where they can push it flat, then maybe just leave half a step. So stand on the service line, because then you can swallow up that space in front of you incredibly quickly. But if they try to nudge it in at you, you can also cover that. I felt like in those situations, she came forward a little bit too much. And there was a few times where it was suddenly on her and she wasn't able to play as effectively. But having said that, it must also be said that for a large portion of the match against the Chinese pair, I felt Clarissa actually did really well to win the net battle. And against someone like Wei Xin, who when she's on it is insanely good there, I think very, very impressive. So yeah, good positive start for this pair. I think they are playing in Taipei in the Korea 300s. And actually, no, they are playing. I saw that they won their first match in Taipei. So I'll certainly be keeping my eye out on them to see how they do. Another new pair that have had a very positive start for Malaysia in the mixed doubles is Jimmy Wong and Cheng Su Yin. They started their partnership last month in Singapore and had a great win over Feng Yanze and Wang Dongping. Now, before these partnerships, Jimmy Wong was with Lai Pei Jing and Cheng Su Yin was with Hu Pang Rong. But those partnerships have switched. Jimmy was kicked out of BAM in 2022, but now he's back in. And I think this pair certainly took a lot of positives from the last tour last month. And they took that into this, and they did exceptionally well by reaching the semi-finals in Japan. They did play the China Open. Not sure whether maybe their ranking's not high enough to get in. I'm not quite sure on that, whether there's a reason why they didn't play in China, but it doesn't matter. In Japan, they had a very good run, and they're en route to reaching that semi-final. They beat three very good pairs. They beat Shimigami and Hobara, who were the finalists at the Singapore Open last month. They beat Jaquel and Del Rue, the All England finalists, and a pair that's won the Super 1000 events. And they also beat Boe and Christiansen, who won Singapore and Indonesia last month, who went into this leg as one of the best pairs in mixed doubles in the world. So incredible performances, and I think lots of positives. I loved how Jimmy Wong has great control from the center of the court. He has a good ability to be able to open up the court from numerous positions. Really good at this from the defense. So if he's slightly late and he's he can hold the center and he can find gaps and find pushes. He can kind of do a little bit of skill to play back to the net, or he can just open up the court. And I felt that he has that really, really good. He has a pretty decent attack too. It's not absolutely thunderous, but pretty solid. For me, Cheng Su-yen is a solid all-round player, can certainly make the difference at the net. She did so in all the matches I watched her play. She was able to get the shuttle going down more often than not. Not always with fast shots, but those placement shots, those little pushes just down into the midcourt. They're so effective in mixed doubles. I just get a feeling this pair have a nice connection. They link up well and have a good understanding of each other, even though they haven't played together for too long. This could be crucial. Now, one area I feel they need to work on, and this is more specifically Jimmy Wong, is probably fitness, or the ability to maintain his intensity at this level. In his partnership with Lai Pei-jing, they were pretty successful. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know numerous finals and titles, but they were at the lower level. And when you come to the best in the world, the intensity ramps up. And I just felt that Jimmy Wong did pretty well, actually. There's a few times where I thought he looked a bit tired in some of the earlier rounds, but was able to kind of re-find it or hold it together. But certainly, I think when they came up against Tang Chunman and Seng Sweat in the semi-finals, it was pretty evenly matched. But I felt the difference, what won it for the pair from Hong Kong, was their ability to sustain that intensity throughout the match. I think Jimmy Wong just dipped ever so slightly. I talked about it only needs to be by a small amount. That's all it takes. So I think some work on his fitness. Like I said, he'd been outside of BAM. Now he's back in it. I'm not saying that he didn't train hard before, but I think his training, he needs to mix doubles. If you're the male player, is really hard. You do play probably 70-80% of the shots, and there's a lot of court coverage going on. You need to be able to be incredibly fit. But it was a good start, and I'm quite excited to see more of them. I actually watched a little bit this morning of their match from the Taipei Open, where they were beaten by Watanabe and Taguchi rather comfortably. And actually, that leads nicely on, because the next pair I want to talk about is Yuta Watanabe and Mayu Taguchi. Now, they've been together for a little while now, and I know they are a pair that have come under scrutiny, more so Taguchi, with many feeling that Watanabe is being wasted. Yuta Watanabe is a two-time Olympic bronze medalist, multiple All England champions. His partnership with Arisa Igarashi was highly successful, and I think many felt that when those two split, it was a bad time for them to split, because a number of the pairs after the Paris Olympics, like Zheng Siwei and Wang Chong, retired, or they didn't play on too much long after. Sursun Jae then stopped playing mixed and focused on men's doubles. Dichapon Pruvanukro had split with Sapsuri, and they were one of the top pairs. The kind of pairs that Watanabe and Igarashi were regularly competing with. I felt that probably most people felt that there was a chance for Watanabe and Igarashi to take the mantle and potentially become the pair in mixed doubles, but sadly not. And I think because then the early results with Taguchi, the fact that she was very young, the fact that she was more of a ladies doubles player rather than a mixed doubles player, there were all these questions. And I think many, for that reason, saw that Watanabe was being wasted. And in 2025, their results and what they were achieving and how they were playing, I think it backed up most people's theories. But 2026 seems to be the year we are seeing signs of things looking up for this Japanese pair. They obviously won a bronze medal at the Asia Championships, which was a great result, and they won a few lower tournaments, something which I think was a really good decision. And I think many players and pairs can take note of this if they're either coming back or as a new partnership, or a pair, a situation like Watanabe and Taguchi, is play the low events, get some wins, build some confidence, and slowly build yourself back up again. Now, there was a small setback for this pair, which was unfortunate, and that was that they were unable to play in Singapore and Indonesia last month because of an injury to Yuta Watanabe. And whilst he even admitted this, Yuta, that he's not at 100% fitness, or it definitely wasn't when he played in Japan. I was impressed, and for a few reasons. There are, of course, still some criticisms. Don't worry, it can't all be positive for anyone. No one can get away from a Beckman's breakdown with some criticism thrown in. But okay, positives. For me, the biggest one is that for the first time, and I noticed this a little bit before Singapore and Indonesia, but it really hammered it home in Japan and China. It felt like for the first time, it didn't seem like Watanabe is trying to cover everything. In the beginning of their partnership, he did look like someone trying to literally play obstacle singles on a doubles court. Now, that isn't really trying to be a massive dig at Taguchi. It was just that she's got a different style to Igarashi. She's left-handed. There was many factors. She was so young and inexperienced. I felt like Watanabe was trying to find his feet with her, and as a result, he was trying to do so much of the heavy lifting that he was just all over the place. And when you're like that and it splits your attention, it's not going to be conducive with good results or good performances. Like I said, it meant he wasn't fully focused on what he needed to do, and I think it often led to poor shots and a breakdown of their side. I feel now he is much more confident in what Taguchi can do, and it seems like he is fully focused on himself. I think one big thing that has really helped this, and I've said this before, is being two left-handers. There is obviously a clear backhand side. And I've noticed a few times that players would lift out over to their forehand and then do the counter over to the backhand. And I think Taguchi has got insanely good at her round the head interception of that side. Her interceptions of the net are very, very strong. That was something that I always actually noticed from the first time I saw her play, but it's got even better. She can, and I think it's gone even better than the last time I saw, because before when I watched, I was like, oh, she's starting to protect that side. She's looking at and she's intercepting. Now, she's not just protecting, she can apply further pressure from that side. She rarely lets any shots through that channel. And as a result, if you go back and watch some of their older matches, you can see Watanabe trying to fall in behind in case she didn't get it. And as a result, that meant that if a player was able to then go down the other side, Watanabe was covering too much space and couldn't cover it effectively. Now, you see that sometimes, of course, he can still cover it, but he's much more focused on his forehand side. He's got much more faith in Taguchi being able to cut out. Second positive thing, and I've kind of just already touched on it, but I think Taguchi's front court is exceptional. This was an area I felt she looked good in from the beginning, but has moved forward leaps and bounds. She intercepts well and is now able to win points and create chances. In the quarterfinal with China against Dichapon and Sapsri, I honestly felt that for large parts, she was actually the best player on court in open play. She made had a huge impact. And I think this is what ultimately has led to the first point, that Watanabe can play with more freedom and confidence. And I think this leads into another positive, is Taguchi's confidence on court has gone up. She looks like she believes that she belongs now, which is great to see at the start. Understandably, pressure of playing with one of Japan's most decorated doubles players, if not most decorated. For a youngster, that was a lot of a burden for her to take, and I think it did affect her. But now, I think she's starting to believe that she belongs. There's still some areas that she lacks, but confidence has massively improved. Against the tie combination of Dichapon and Satsuri, I think there were moments within that match where in the past she would have folded, maybe a bad patch here or there. But now she doesn't seem to dwell on those situations as much. She pulls herself together and gets stuck in and believes. And there was a few times where, like I said, in that match, I felt that, okay, Taguchi had not a bad patch. The ties were playing well, and Taguchi might have missed a few. And I felt, okay, maybe this is the time when the pair becomes unstuck. I'd seen it happen before, but no, didn't really happen. Last positive for me was that Watanabe clearly wasn't 100% fit in Japan. That injury certainly looked to still be bothering him. In fact, he actually admitted it. But in China the following week, he looked different. I could tell not just because of how he moved, but how exuberant he was on court. He looked a little like the old Watanabe. So I think the injury that he had that made him withdraw from Singapore and Indonesia, he admitted in Japan it still wasn't 100%. It certainly looked that way to me. He just looked a bit down, not quite as quick or quite as exuberant as usual. But in China, I don't know what happened. Whether I don't know, but he looked. I'm not going to say 100%, but massively higher than he was in Japan. Which I think, if that's a sign that his fitness is coming back or his injury is pretty much over, positives, that's going to keep going. And I already mentioned that I watched their match in the Taipei Open against Jimmy Wong and Cheng Yu Fei in a potentially very tricky match, and they won very, very easily and they looked like they carried on their form from China there. Now, I did say criticisms, and I'll be honest, they are still aimed predominantly at Mayo Taguchi. One is still her defense. It has improved, but I feel she is very forehand dominant, and when a pair was able to go across her, she likes to be out on her backhand side like this, and a number of pairs, Deechapon was able to whip it across her, and was able to get a lot of weak returns, if not straight up winners. I think just improving on that, and it's still like when she's pushed back, she hasn't quite got that forehand power to drive it back or to get herself out of trouble. If you can pin her, you can tend to get on top of the rally. And lastly, her serve. There were many moments throughout numerous of their matches where she just simply couldn't serve. You only have to look at the final serve of the match against the Taipei in the quarters of the China Open. It was 19-20, and when I saw that it was Taguchi serving, I thought, oh no, they're not going to win this. Now, I know it was a pressure situation, but the serve that she did was an absolute shocker, and that wasn't just because 19-20 in the third, she collapsed. There was numerous times throughout that where the serve was a little loose, a little bit like Feng Huang, but even worse. She was flicking a lot. Yeah, serve, certainly something that hopefully she can get under control, because I don't think you're going to get away at the highest level if your serve isn't right, especially in mixed doubles. But yeah, I think overall, much more positive, many more positive things moving forward. I'm still not convinced, though, that there'll be a pair that can win the big titles, but I would probably say now, I believe it's not impossible. Before, or last year, I was starting to lose a little bit of faith. I know I said give it time, but that was waning a little bit. But from what I've seen this year and what I saw in Japan and China, especially in China, and what I've seen briefly from Taipei Open, is that this pair are on the rise, and I think we could see some good results from them, but more time would tell. Another Japanese pair that I want to talk about is Koga and Saito. They reached the semi-final in Japan, and to be honest, I couldn't have been happier. Mainly because it means I get to see Koga play again. He had retired or stopped playing the World Tour in the men's doubles, where he was playing more often. And I thought, he's a very entertaining character. Always very entertaining. We all know about some of the moments that he's done in the past, and I thought that we'd seen the end of him. But no, this partnership with Saito means we get to see more of him, and I'm all for that, and I'm sure I'm not alone. But I'm also really happy because I felt that for Saito, when she was split from Midorikawa at the end of last year, I know that she wasn't expecting it. It came at a huge surprise, and I think she was quite down about that because she saw that partnership with Dorikawa as at least going until the LA Olympics. So she must have felt that, wow, is this my chance at going to the Olympics gone? So the fact that she's kind of, for me, I think she's landed on her feet with Koga. And I say that for a few reasons. I actually think Koga is better suited to being a mixed player than a men's doubles player because of his skills and his creative shots. I think they belong on a mixed doubles court. I also think Saito is happy because I think Koga is far more consistent in his level than Midorikawa. Not to say that I think Midorikawa is still the better player than Koga, but Midorikawa is the kind of player who can fluctuate hugely. Great 1 minute, not so great or aloof the next. Koga is certainly more steady, and I think we can see Saito is a little bit happier with that fact. Now, in Japan, they did come unstuck against Feng Huang and Wang Dongping. They simply couldn't unsteady the Chinese pair. Feng was like a praying mantis at the back. I mentioned about how stable he is across the lateral side of the midcourt. And they did, to be honest, the Chinese pair expose a big weakness in Koga, and that being his speed is not the highest. But yet, I had to mention them because they are a fun pair, and I am happy for both of them. They seem to have a genuine connection, and this is showing in their results and their performances. Now, last thing on the mixed doubles. Wow, I've already been talking for 45 minutes and I'm only on discipline 1 of 5. Bloody hell, this is going to be a long episode. Anyway, I have to talk, I want to talk about Tang Chunman and Seo Sweat. They reached the final of Japan and were knocked out in the first round of China, but I think their efforts in Japan did knock them a little bit. Plus, they did face Shimigami and Hibara, who are a very capable pair. They did reach the final of Singapore 750 last month. Now, I really wanted to talk about this pair for one reason, really. And it was something that when I watched them jumped out at me. Who else, am I alone in this, felt that Seo Sweat might just be in the best shape of her life? Who's with me on that? I think so. There's no taping on her knees. I felt she was jumping out to shots that I've never seen her jump out to before. She was covering Tang whenever he went forward, which, to be fair, he did quite a lot. And just generally, she looked really fucking strong. Movement has never been Seo Sweat's strong suit. She had multiple knee injuries throughout her career. But I felt, my God, she was moving well in Japan. And China, at the China Open, actually. When they had some time away, because, I think this was because Seo Sweat was looking to retire or kind of had unofficially retired, I guess. I noticed that Tang Chunman for that period increased his physicality. He was all over the court and could sustain it for a long time. I've mentioned this already, but I think that's something many male mixed players are realizing they need these days. And I genuinely believe that is because of players like Zheng Siwei, who his speed and his coverage all over the court and the intensity he brings. I think that has influenced a lot of how mixed doubles is played these days. Now, when Tang and Si were reformed at the Asia Championships last year, I did notice that at times Seo Sweat did struggle to keep up with this newfound speed and physicality and approach from Tang Chunman. Tang was almost, as I saw it, playing too fast for her. I think in Japan, she has finally caught up enough. When added to the lovely touches both players have, they beat many pairs by taking the pace out at the right time. They were a joy to watch. Their matches really entertained me. They were a great blend of intensity and power with subtlety and touch. And I think heading into the World Championships, I certainly wouldn't be overlooking them. They could be a dark horse for me, especially given that they know how to perform on the biggest stages. But who's with me on Seo Sweat? I was really impressed. For someone that's struggled with injuries, and that was the reason why she was thinking to retire, to a year and a half later, looking that physically strong, kudos to her. That is ultra impressive, and I hope that it can stay that way. Right, next discipline, women's doubles. Now, I had a comment on my last breakdown saying that I barely looked at the women's doubles discipline, and that's a fair point. I actually did somewhat overlook it to some extent, but I did say in my reply to that comment that I will be making sure that I would talk a lot about it in my next breakdown. And the women of World Badminton certainly gave me plenty to talk about. With the first thing I have to talk about is the final in Japan. The final was between Zhang Shushan and Jai Fan of China and Kong Hee-yong and Kim Hee-jong of Korea, and they produced an absolute belter, ending 30-29 in the third. And not just that, the last point was so tight to the line that a challenge was needed as well. Absolutely incredible scenes. But it was the Korean pair who did come out on the better side of that match. It was absolutely mind-blowing. It was a mind-blowing game from start to finish, and it wasn't just because of the 30-29 scoreline. No, for me, it was the level of those extra points. So the level throughout the whole match was high. But what really stood out to me was those extra points. So from 20 all, or from 2019, the first match point was on, until 30-29, that whole period of the match was played at the highest level. When you consider, like, the pressure in those situations, it's a final as well, to produce that level of badminton and consistently was absolutely unreal. Both pairs ended the match with 6 match points each. And yeah, like I said, every single rally in those extra points was epic. There were no shit points. There was no serves in the net, no loose shots, no crappy errors. Just absolute banging rallies, one after another. Must be said, I think the Korean coaches and Korean fans must have been happy that it was Kim Hee-jong that was serving at 29 all, because her serve was exceptional throughout the match, and she served another great one at 29 all. The pressure to deliver a serve like she did, absolutely amazing. Yeah, this final really was something. 4 players were acutely aware of what was going on. You had to press forward, you had to go out and win your points. If you were on the fence, you had to try and counter. You couldn't rest on your laurels. And all 4 players did this consistently throughout the match. But for me, if I had to pick a standout player, Kim Hee-jong. Not just in the final, but throughout the whole tournament, actually. She created so many chances, both from the attack as well as the defense. She had that uncanny ability to find gaps at all times. She reminded me a little bit of like when Seo Seung-jae is playing his best. There's a lot of comments about, and Jill likes to say this, about how he has this ability under such pressure to always seem to find the gap that really most players only spot when you watch the rally back. I think the quality to stay composed and find space from Kim Hee-jong was absolutely exceptional. She was helped by Kong Hee-young, who, it must be said, this was her first tournament back after ankle surgery. So the fact that she was able to play at that level and to sustain that level throughout such an intense match, throughout such an intense tournament, huge credit must be given to her. But she absolutely rips it on her attack. One of the whippiest and most explosive smashes and attacks in women's doubles. The speed and angle she creates only blends beautifully with Kim's read at the net. I think they're an insanely good partnership. I think the Korean coaches must have been salivating at the mouth when they realised they could put those two together. Kim Hee-jong's read at the net and her touch and set-up shots, and Kong Hee-young's lightning fast and whippy attacks, those things just blend absolutely beautifully. Yeah, I said what stood out to me was Kong being able to keep that intensity. Something, that must be noted considering this was her first tournament back in quite a while due to that ankle surgery. Zhang Shushan and Zhai Fan, I felt they played a great final too. They had a good tournament actually, and for me this was one of their best performances of 2026. Last year they came into great form around this time of the year. They went into the World. Sadly, they weren't able to get in the top 4 seeds and were seeded against the world number ones, Liu Tan, in the quarters. But maybe this year, I think they're a little higher in the rankings. They probably would get a top 4 seeding. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it does seem like they are finding form at this time of the year again, which is great. Obviously, like I said, with the World Championships and the Asian Games. Zhang Shushan has continued to develop her attack and power from the back. It'll never be huge, but it is becoming less of a vulnerability, and Zhai Fan is just Zhai Fan. The only concern for this pair, and I think this might go some way to why they didn't perform so well in the China Open, is that Zhai Fan was holding her back towards the end of the final. I hope that this doesn't get in the way for the Worlds and beyond for this pair. Both pairs actually did fall rather early the following week in China, but given how hard it is to go back to back, the fact that Kong Hee-yeon has just come back from injury, and that Zhai Fan, like I said, did have that small niggle at the end, and the small fact that their final was just absolutely epic, I think they can be excused for not having the best performance or not getting far again at the following week. It really was a final that will be remembered for quite some time. Moving on, I have to talk about Liu Shengshu and Tan Ning, the world number ones and world champions. At the Japan Open, we did see 2 huge withdrawals in the women's events after the first round. One of them was An Si-young in the women's singles, and the other was this Chinese pair of Liu Shengshu and Tan Ning in the women's doubles. I believe the reason was that Tan Ning was struggling with her Achilles. I heard on numerous occasions Jill Clark and Steve Pedersen on commentary say that she was struggling to walk, that she had a noticeable limp when they saw her walking around the hotel in Japan. It is for this reason that when play got underway in China and they were set to play, I wondered what level they would bring. I did think maybe they were being cautionary in Japan by pointing out their main focus would have been their home event, Super 1000 no less, but I thought maybe we'll see them lose or retire again, as there are bigger events on the horizon. Well, not only did they not lose, but they destroyed pretty much everyone they played, winning the whole tournament without dropping a single game. And by doing so, they became the first women's doubles pair to win 3 Super 1000 events in the same calendar year. And I think with it, they reaffirmed their position as heavy favourites to retain the world title next month. Now, I could sit here and reel off the usual stuff about Liu and Tan. Their attacking play is insanely hard to defend against. They have fantastic tumble serves, making the service situation difficult against them. And Liu Shengshu is probably the best women's doubles player in the world right now. But for this episode, I want to highlight something that I noticed that was a bit different about this pair. And that was how Tan Ning played. Now, Tan Ning for me has always been a player that can be exposed in the partnership, a way in to defeat this pair. It's not because she isn't good, but that Liu Shengshu is such a playmaker and can change a game almost single-handedly, that playing on Tan Ning not just takes out Liu Shengshu from the game, but can almost force her to try to get involved when she shouldn't. For me, Tan Ning and she tends to be more of the rear court player. She can be exposed, she can be played against a lot more, and it does give pairs way-ins to defeat this Chinese pair. But in China, I have to say, I felt Tan Ning was actually more of the playmaker. Certainly what I noticed in the final. When I've watched this pair before, I tend to spot that Tan Ning is more of the rear court player, or seems to spend a lot more of the match at the back, a role she is quite happy to take on. But in China, I noticed that she kept darting forward into net, making those surging runs forward, being very proactive there, and taking on the front court role, something I felt she did absolutely brilliantly. I wrote a note on that saying, wow, I've never seen Tan Ning move forward so much and make such an impact. And then later in that final, I think Jill Clark said, wow, basically said the exact same thing. So the fact that the voice of badminton reaffirmed what I was seeing made me feel pretty good about myself. Now, the reason she did this, it might have been because of her Achilles, or the fact she maybe didn't feel so good, or didn't have confidence in her movement, that if she had to move around the back, she probably didn't feel all too good. But being in the front, maybe a little bit easier for her to do so. But whatever it was, whatever the reason why she came forward more, it was incredibly effective. It's not to say that Liu Shengshu wasn't creating chances. She was also very, very good. But for me, Tan Ning absolutely shone and was exceptional throughout the whole tournament, especially in the final. I wonder whether we'll see more of this approach moving forward. I personally think they should. I think they can actually probably be a pair that, if say Tan Ning gets whatever issue she's got going on, if she gets 100%, they can mix and match. And that actually could be a way to take this pair to a whole new level. But yeah, no, I certainly noticed that Tan Ning was taking on more of the front court duties, and she did so exceptionally well. Next pair, Baek Lee and Lee So-hee. The reason I want to talk about this pair is they had a bit of a shocking Japan Open, and their China Open was good. They reached the semi-finals. But the reason I want to talk to them is that if there was an award for who turned their game around the most from Japan to China, then I actually think Baek Lee and Lee So-hee might take that title. In Japan, like I said, they lost to America's Lauren Lam and Alison Lee in the second round, and then they went on to reach the China Open semi-final. But it wasn't the result, but more how they played. And I don't just mean they played poorly in Japan and well in China. No, for me, it was more their approach to how they played. That's what really was the huge, huge difference. In Japan versus the Americans, the Koreans were playing as if they were doing a defensive drill. They were happy to lift every single shuttle. They rarely challenged the net, if at all. And when they were on the attack, the front player was pretty much like a statue, and it didn't matter if it was Baek Lee at the net or Lee So-hee. I was watching it going, what are they doing? I've seen them sometimes play this way before, and it always leaves me going, what are they doing? Because when they're very proactive together, or willing to smash hard and work hard and try to get onto the attack, they can actually do it really, really well. The World Tour Finals last year, when they won and they beat Liu Xingxu and Tan Ning in the semi-finals, it was exactly that approach that they applied. So it kind of does confuse me as to why they sometimes have these matches where they play like this. Not to take away from the American pair who took full advantage of this with a brilliant performance. They attacked really well, Lauren using her jump smashes and Alison with a front court vision and brilliance. I just want to make it clear the Americans earned their win, but they were helped a little by the way that the Koreans played. I think this was highlighted the following day when the American pair had to play another Korean pair, Kim Hee-jong and Kong Hee-yong. Kim Hee-jong was exceptionally active at the front, and as a result, the Americans struggled to make as much of an impact as they did the day before against Baek Lee. But so for me, as a result, I was quite interested heading into the China Open as to what Baek Lee will see. Would it be more of the same, or would they change? Well, I don't know who spoke to them. It was possibly Park Ju-bong gave a bit of a bollocking, but they were completely different. It was like night and day. Both players were incredibly active. They attacked more. And when they were on defense, they were constantly looking for counter options. They were more willing to smash from full power as well. It was really nice to see, and they were rewarded with good wins over tough Japanese opponents like Hirota and Sakuramoto and Iwanaga and Nakanishi. They beat both those pairs in straight games. Against against Hirota and Sakuramoto, it seemed to me the Japanese started to fear going on the attack due to the amount of counters that the Koreans were throwing at them. In the semis, they were outclassed by Liu Tan, but again, most pairs in China were. I hope that when the world rolls around, that we see the Koreans from the China Open, not from the Japan Open. And last pair I'm going to talk about, there is another pair, which is Fukushima Matsumoto, who had a brilliant couple of weeks, but there was a question on them a little later that I thought I'd save some of the things for that. The last pair is the Malaysians, Pearly Thinaah and Toma Jr. They had an exceptionally good 2025, winning numerous titles, reaching a lot of finals, including a world final. However, their 2026 hasn't been as good. A big reason for this has been injury issues, with Pearly Thinaah suffering a back injury just before the Uber Cup, which forced her to pull out. She didn't travel to Horsens. She is back, and she did admit on this leg of the World Tour that she is only around 70%. And I'd say that's pretty much what I saw as well. There were improvements between Japan and China, which is positive, but it's still a fair bit away from the level that earned them a spot in the world final last year. I would never fully rule them out, but if I'm being a realist, I think if they can make it close to the medal rounds, the World Championships, they are doing well. So I mean getting to the quarterfinals. I think if they can do that, I can think they can see that as a positive. They'll be seeded outside the top four as well. And all top fours will likely be too much for them as they currently stand. That's not to say, like I said, they can't pull off something. They are a very good pair, and they can have their day. But based on what I've seen in Japan and China, and on just the history of how this year has gone for them, I think they're going to really struggle against the top four pairs, and they'll probably struggle also against most of the pairs inside the top 10 as it currently stands. In Japan, I felt Pearly was still pretty static at the net. She's never someone who's ultra active. She likes to stand there and I think kind of really assess the situation. She's not always like moving on her toes. But she looked notably static. But in China, I did see a little bit more in this department. She was getting herself involved at the net a little bit more as well. In the first round, she was certainly more engaged, but this was against a lower ranked pair. And I actually said in my notes that I would be curious to see how this holds up against a top pair. And well, when they faced the new world number twos of Fukushima and Matsumoto, it showed there's still quite a journey ahead of the Malaysians. As that match progressed, the Japanese looked more and more comfortable on defense, making it next to impossible for the Malaysians to link up and win their points. If the Japanese were second best in that match, they were quite happy to lift because they knew they could be patient and knew they could build a counter from that situation. And when you consider that Pearly Thinaah is one of the hardest smashes in women's doubles, and Tina Muralitharan is no slouch, and they are quick, I think that says a little bit about their ability to link up at the moment. A back injury is never easy to recover from. There are numerous examples of it being career-ending. And as well as injuries, it is a physical recovery and a mental one too. I think they still got quite a long way, this Malaysian pair, to rebuilding confidence, not just physically, but mentally too. I do think, while she isn't, I don't think she's struggling from any physical injuries. I think Tina is struggling a little bit as well. And I say that because I think whenever your partner isn't fully fit, it does affect how you play. You try to do more. You start to focus on your partner a bit as well as rather than what you're sorry. You try to do more. You know, you focus more. Your focus is split. You're focusing on what your partner can and can't do, and that can always kind of take from your own game. I said that in the mixed doubles section with Watanabe and Taguchi, that he was so concerned with what Taguchi was doing that he wasn't fully focused on his job. And I think Tina Muralitharan is in a similar position, but for different reasons. Because she knows that Pearly is not at 100%. I think it's just leading to her not able to just go, right, what do I need to do in this rally? Because when this pair are playing well, they have such a good relationship, a good friendship. They got a good synergy together. They play together for a long time. They almost know what each other's going to do before they've even done it. And so when you got that and both players are fully fit, you can just go, right, what am I doing? You can almost guess what your partner's going to do, and you also have faith. I know what they're going to do. I'm confident in what they can do. I can just focus on me and focus on my opponents. And I think at the moment, because Pearly isn't 100% fit, Tina is focused. Her focus is also a little bit on Pearly, what she can and can't do. And that sometimes can change what shots you choose, how you approach it, your own focus, etc. It takes away from what you can do, but also what are your opponents doing, and it just eats into it. It's a bit like if I use singles, because I was a singles player. If you're not fully fit, like you're not confident in your fitness, if you ever played a match and you're going, oh, I'm not sure I can actually last, then you can't. It takes away from your focus of what you need to do on the match. The reason you train is that and the reason you practice day in, day out, and the reason you do hard training is that you're confident in your technical skills. You don't need to think about how you're playing every shot. It comes automatically. You don't need to worry about how you're moving. That comes automatically. Your fitness, you can sustain the game plan that you want to play and what you need to play. You don't need to worry about it. It's all back there. Your focus is purely on how do I beat the person in front of me. So if you're a little bit injured, even if it's not a major injury, it just takes your mind away ever so slightly. And like I said, at the highest level, all it takes is having something taken away from you just minutely can make a huge difference. And I think for Tina, it's a bit more than a minute one at the moment. Yeah, I just think that for me, they're in that situation. And there's going to come a day where suddenly, and I've seen this in other pairs, suddenly you go, say, I put myself in Tina's shoes. Pearly's there. She's back. This is 100% Pearly. And suddenly, all that worry, all those thoughts going into what's she doing, what can she do? If I play this shot, can she get that one? They're gone. And then your level naturally comes up. And as a result, the pair's level goes up. And I think once they reach that stage, I'm not sure when it's going to happen. This is why I say I think pairs like this who are proven to be world class will always come back. The only thing that will get in the way is if that back injury of Pearly never fully heals. I hope it does. But when it does, or if it's very close to it and Tina can suddenly go, oh, Pearly's back, that's the moment we're going to see. I'm waiting for that moment. I'll give you one example, actually. When I was at the Thomas Cup, Ranky Reddy and Shetty, I know they've had their issues. Injury issues. The shoulder injury to Ranky Reddy has flared up again, which is why they withdrew. But that injury had been affecting Ranky-Reddy and Shetty Ranky-Reddy for a long time. At the Thomas Cup, I commentated on them playing against Wang Qilin and Se of Chinese Taipei. And they were playing well, but I always got the sense that Shetty was trying to overcover, or was a little bit concerned with Ranky-Reddy because of the issues that he's been having. But at that match, I felt that Ranky-Reddy was actually playing well and looked kind of like the issues were no longer there in that moment. And the shift I noticed in Shetty, when suddenly he didn't have to think about Ranky-Reddy at all, suddenly Shetty started to play so much better. He started to read the game and playing the kind of stuff that we know he's capable of, because there was no longer this worry in the back of his mind of, what if I play this, can Ranky-Reddy actually, can Satwik actually deal with what comes next? There isn't anything pulling him. He was 100% focused on that, and they got better and better from that moment forward. I'm waiting for the moment that we get to see Pearly and Thinaah play like that. I do think it's quite good that they are playing the Taipei Open this week, just giving themselves a bit more time on court, possibly to rebuild that confidence, maybe edge closer to that situation happening. I haven't seen any of their matches yet. I'm not sure if they played yet, but I will certainly be keeping an eye on them. And I think if they do want to do well at the Worlds, I think they have to do pretty well in Taipei just to get a little bit of confidence back in their game. Right, moving on. Men's doubles. Plenty of things actually I've got on my list here, as to be expected. I of course have to start with Fajar Alfian and Mohammad Shohibul Fikri. They marked their 1-year anniversary as a pair in the most perfect way by winning back-to-back titles in Japan and China. They were partnered together a year ago, and it was kind of unexpected. It wasn't supposed to be a permanent partnership, just temporary. At the time, Alfian's partner Ardiento was spending time with his wife because she was expecting a child. And Fikri's partner at the time, Daniel Martin, had suffered a bad knee injury and was out. So they partnered for Japan and China and actually did really well. I think they reached the quarterfinals in Japan and only just lost there. And then they won the China Open and actually beat Kim Won-ho and Seung Jae en route. Then, obviously, they were resplit for the Worlds that was coming, but then they were partnered again together and again had absolutely brilliant results. And I think because of that, because the way they were playing and performances and stuff, the coaches made the decision to make them a permanent pair, and they went on to do very, very well. The only concern about them, concern might be the wrong word, was that after that China Open, they did reach 5 more finals, but they were runners-up in all 5. And I would say that there was a few of those where they were probably favourites to win. So I think that's another positive for the way that they played in Japan and China, is that they managed to get over that, and they did it back to back. And then what makes it even better is that in both those finals, they beat the world #1 pair of Kim Won-ho and Seung Jae. It was amazing badminton from them, and it will certainly give them huge confidence heading into their first World Championships together next month. Now, those 2 wins over the world #1s were absolutely huge and will undoubtedly give them massive confidence. But I also feel, and possibly even bigger than the wins over Kim Won-ho and Seung Jae, that's quite a statement to make, is the 2 semi-finals that they won, because in both of them, in Japan and China, they defeated home favourite pairs and pairs spurred on by home support, and pairs that, if I had to look at those 2 pairs, probably had their best performances in both those semi-finals. Yet Alfian and Fikri were able to come out on top. And not just that, but both matches were really, really tight. So whenever you get over the line in one of those tight match situations, that gives you even more confidence. And I actually think not only will that those wins give them confidence into the Worlds, but it was actually probably what gave them the confidence to beat Kim Won-ho and Seung Jae in the finals. In Japan, they defeated Hoki and Kobayashi, who were having a great tournament in Japan. The best of Takura Hoki that I'd seen in a long while. He was looking a lot fitter. But for me, what made that win especially good was that it did seem in the second game that Alfian was starting to struggle physically, brought on a bit by the fact that Japanese defence got a little wise to the wider angled play of the Indonesians, pushing the rallies into more of a physical territory. Yet, despite this, the Indonesians found a way to win. And combined with it being a tight and nervy ending, it is wins like that, like I said, that gives pairs great momentum. And I do think that win gave them the much needed boost against the Koreans in that Japan Open semi-final. And I've got a couple of examples from that final. One was 16-all in the first game. The Indonesians suddenly pulled away. I feel it was their semi-final win, and doing so by winning really close, that gave them the confidence in those closing stages, those really crucial moments of the match. 16-all, the last five, it's a game to 5 at that point, unless obviously it goes to extra points. And I think their win in the semi-final helped them and gave them that boost, and that's what was quite important in the final. And then again in the second, it was getting tight, but again the Indonesians got a little run at the key moment, this time led by Alfian, who read the situation beautifully. At the end of that match, the final in Japan, again, it was getting really, really tight. And then Alfian, I think he anticipated within 4 rallies, 4 shots, and even won the match on one of them. Played absolutely outstanding. And I think, again, it was the confidence from their semi-final win over a home favourite pair that were playing really well, and the fact it was really close. And then in the China Open semis, they defeated a really well playing Wang Chan and Liang Wei Kung. The Chinese are the Olympic silver medalists, but since then they have been a little up and down. They didn't have an amazing Japan Open, but in China they really rose their level. And for me, Wang Chan looked much more focused in China than he did in Japan. In Japan, he was dipping in and out a bit too much. In China, especially in that semi-final, he definitely wasn't. He was 100% focused. Yet despite coming up against a pair like this, once again, with the crowd behind them, the Indonesian found a way to win. It really could have gone either way, but it was the Indonesians that held it together a little tighter in that semi-final. I felt in that semi-final that it was Alfian who was decisive. He almost had a bad patch at the death, going for a few too many extravagant shots. But other than that, he was the one to find gaps, to take pace out, and to dictate players. All 4 players in that semi-final I thought were really good, but Alfian made the difference. But again, like in Japan, it was winning a tight semi against a home pair that I felt helped them in the final. Talking of the final in China against Kim and-so, it was a completely different match to the one in Japan. It was much closer. Kim Won-ho and Seo Seung-jae were clearly determined to put right the week before, and add to the fact that it was the one Super 1000, the China Open, that they weren't able to win the year before. And I actually felt throughout the week that the Koreans were absolutely, they were on fire all week in China. Kim Won-ho showed a huge step up in his general play. He, for me, was the best player in this pair all week. But just as Alfian had done in the semi-final, in the final he stepped up. He was a bit quiet in the first game, actually, Alfian, mainly because the Koreans, especially Kim Won-ho, were onto everything, defending well, pressing well, not allowing the Indonesians to play fast pushes and drives. And whenever Kim Won-ho got onto the net, he never relinquished. But in the second and third games, I think Alfian started to re-find those gaps that he seemed to find at will in the semi-finals, and got himself involved far more in the match. I noticed it right from pretty much the first couple of rallies. I was like, Alfian's, okay, he's making a big push to get himself involved and kind of have a real say in the match, and that carried on for the rest. For me, this match certainly became a battle of how patient, creative, and consistent could the Indonesians keep up their attack versus the Koreans' wall defense. I also would say it was a battle between 2 individuals in each pair. So for me, it was the brilliance of Won-ho versus the brilliance of Alfian. Both pairs finding gaps, both pairs pressing forward and being very difficult to get away from at the net. Their battle between so when I say battle, I mean like both I felt were exceptional, but who was going to be that little bit better? And I think the other battle was Fikri and Jay didn't play badly. They actually played, I thought, very well. But in comparison to their partners, they were the two weaker links. And for me, it was who would dip the least between them, between Fikri and Jay. And as the Indonesians came out on top, I think the Indonesians obviously won both that battle. But again, I want to reiterate, I think it was the tight semi-final they won that helped them in the tight final. When it got to those crunch points, they had confidence they could do it, as not only had they won the week before against the Korean pair, that obviously gave them confidence, but they had done it the day before against the Chinese pair. Now, as for differences between these two finals, I've said a couple already, but I'll go to a couple more. Kim Won-ho was a much better player in the China final than he was in the Japan Open final. And I do think actually both players played a better match in China as well. Their strengths were better. The Indonesians' attack, first game aside, was decent, and I felt the Koreans' defense was much more up to task in China than it was in Japan. But for me, the biggest difference was the approach by the Koreans. They were definitely a little better at taking out pace at times, using the soft blocks and guided shots. They weren't as easily wrapped into the Indonesians' game. They played their style a little more. And I think for that reason, it will probably make the loss in China a little harder and might knock them at the Worlds if they are to face this pair again in the final, which they would be both seeded to do so. There are plenty of other pairs that will have their say when they all land in Delhi in August. But if we get a repeat of the two finals in Japan and China, huge positives for the Indonesians. They will have faith that they know they can beat them, beat the Korean pair. They know they can break down the defenses. And also just the fact that one of those matches was tight, 21-19 in the third in China. Actually, the second and third were both 21-19. So the fact that if it gets close and tight, usually where the composure and calmness of the Koreans pays off a little bit more, I think the fact that the Indonesians were able to get the line in those situations will be a huge confidence boost for them. I guess I should answer what the Indonesians did differently. For me, it isn't always about that. They've always been capable. So what I'm saying that is what they differently to actually beat the Korean pair. I know this isn't the first time they've beaten them. They've beaten them last year in China, but obviously they've also lost a couple of times. But they've always been capable of these sorts of performances and results. I think it is just a matter of believing, and it brings it nicely back to what I said. I think it was the two semi-final wins over Hokin Kobayashi in Japan and Wang and Liang in China. Both those pairs had huge home support. Both those pairs were playing their best badminton that I saw on this whole tour. None of them relinquished the pressure they were trying to do, their level, their performance. Yet the Indonesians were able to find a way to beat them, and they did so in some crunch moments. It strengthens players, and if you come out on the right end of those matches, the effect it has on you can be absolutely huge. We saw it at these tournaments in the final, and we could possibly see it roll over into the next two big events, the Worlds and the Asian Games. Okay, moving on. I have to obviously talk about Kim Won-ho and Seo Seung-jae. I kind of already spoken quite a bit about them, about the matches, but I did get a lot of questions about them, and the main thing being, and this always happens whenever, a pair or a player that's gone from winning everything suddenly isn't winning everything. They're always like, are they dipping, or have they fallen off, or have pairs figured them out? Do they need to do something different? All these different questions. I got a lot of them. I think it's understandable that people do ask these questions, though, as last year they were so dominant. And this year, while still winning big titles, the last four tournaments, they haven't come away with a title. So it's a rarity. So, of course, people are going to ask questions about it. Now, it must be said, in those last four tournaments where they haven't won, they've still reached two semi-finals and two finals. So it's not exactly terrible. Still pretty solid consistency, but the questions, like I said, does make sense. Okay, so what happened? What has happened? I think one thing is the level of men's doubles has gone up a bit, mainly because the Koreans have forced it up. Two, you simply can't sustain that level of dominance, or sustain the level of dominance that they had last year. More and more pairs are going to focus on how to beat you, what to improve to beat you. Their training is going to be centered around what do we need to get better at to defeat Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae. And I think we are seeing pairs who had always had the game to beat them actually beat them. As far as Japan and China are concerned, I felt their level, I said this before, I felt their level in China was much better. It was a huge step up from their level in Japan. I think they struggled a bit in Japan until the quarterfinals, then they did get a bit better. But in China, they were on it from the start and looked very strong. I said it before, for me, it was Kim Won-ho who was the best player for the in the Korean combination. I think personally, and this is going to sound really harsh, but I felt Seo Jae was a bit off. He wasn't rubbish by any means. The guy is still insanely good. But usually he is the guy to make the biggest impact in the partnership. He is usually on everything. He's usually finding gaps under huge pressure. And in the crunch moments, he's usually the one that is the most solid. Yet on this leg of the tour, he had moments of that, but quite often he dipped out of it and had a few bad moments too. In a word, I think he looked vulnerable, and it tended to show itself at the absolute crucial stages. Again, that's one thing I said, that Seo Jae is usually so good. What makes this Korean pair so hard to beat is that when things are against them or the match gets tight, they usually find a way to win because they are so solid. And I think actually Seo Jae has looked a little bit vulnerable since the Thomas Cup. Kim Won-ho has been a little up and down, but generally I think Seo Jae has been more down. Again, these are small margins, but they make the biggest difference. Seo Jae's level is usually so insanely high that if he drops, it really does open the door for other pairs, and that's, in my opinion, what has happened. For me, I've said this before in other breakdowns, but with this pair, what they are so good at is rarely are they both off at the same time. And usually, even if one is off, it is never for a full match, and they can usually build into the match. Here, I always had a sense Seo Jae might drop off slightly. In the final, he was the one the Indonesians had more success playing on. It is a harsh criticism, but for me, Seo Jae was too up and down with his level. Too many times he lost that bit of focus, reacted a little slow to situations. His defense was a little weaker than usual. He made more easy mistakes than usual. His serve was also a little vulnerable. It was just these little things, just slightly down, but many of them just made that enough of a gap. And they were pounced on by, if you go beyond Japan and China, they were pounced on by Ranki Reddy and Shetty and Goh Nur, the two pairs that beat them in Singapore and Indonesia. Two pairs that played brilliant badminton, played some of their best badminton, was able to expose those small little things. I don't think, though, for the Koreans, they've dipped tremendously. And we have to consider that possibly they're training hard for the bigger events later in the year. But I do think these two losses, especially that one in China, because it was tight and they were certainly playing closer to their top level, will knock them a little bit. Okay, moving on. Wang Chan and Liang Wei Kang. Like Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae, I've touched on this pair in the Alfian Fikri section, so I'm not going to talk at length, but I do want to add some things. One, I think Liang Wei Kang looks so much fitter and trimmer than he has in the past. His movement around the court and around the back was absolutely great. He was absolutely launching himself at shuttles against the Indonesians. There's a few times where he almost fell out the court. But yeah, no, I think his intensity, his ability to move around the back, and we all know that he's got such a lethal smash. I think he was actually, by being that little bit fitter, he's able to unleash it a little more often, both in terms of just physically being able to smash, but also being able to get him around the shuttle or under the shuttle so he can actually unleash it more often as well. And two, I also felt Liang Wei Kang was the better player of the partnership across both tournaments. Wang Chan was, for me, inspired in the China Open semi-final, But overall, across the tournament and in Japan, Liang was the better player to me, much more solid, played his role well, and even showed he could play a decent front court game. That's actually an area of improvement that I've noticed just a bit before this leg of the tour. 3, Wang Chang, I just wish we could see him be as focused as he was in the semi-final all of the time. He played some fantastic rallies, super entertaining, made huge impacts in that semi-final and in other matches at the China Open. Again, he's probably going to be that kind of player that's not going to be on it all the time, but maybe I'd like him to be a bit more consistent in that department. And lastly, I think this pair have worked on their weaknesses. Steen Pedersen mentioned in the commentary at some point how what worked for them when they first came on tour won't work as well now because defenses have gone up, men's doubles has progressed, namely through the top 2 pairs in the world, but not just them, by the way. But I mentioned already that Liang Wei Kang getting more mobile, improving his front court has certainly helped this pair. Okay, so next section, I got a number of questions about this, and it's the Malaysian men's doubles. As we know, they've been changing around their partnerships. They split up a number of them, and it seems that this is going to go beyond just these tournaments because from the Asian Games selections where Aaron Cha has been selected to play with T Kai Wun and the other pair being Goh Nur, it means that even for the I personally thought, I think I even said this when they split them, we might see this at tournament like the World Tour tournaments, but the World Championships and Asian Games, the majors that are coming up, they revert back. But clearly the coaches have got maybe that gives you an indication of that maybe it could be permanent, these changes. We'll have to see, and I think how they do the Asian Games, Aaron and T Kai Wun more specifically, is how they do, I think, will obviously be the determining factor. I think I read somewhere that Harry and Rexy are potentially hoping that Aaron and T can do what Ku Kian Keat and Tan Boon Hong did in 2006 when they were formed together as a new partnership and won the Asian Games. That was their first major tournament together, and they went and won it, and then obviously became a permanent partnership and went on to achieve really good things. Maybe they're hoping that the same thing will happen 20 years later. I don't know. But I think it's still about these new Malaysian pairs. I think it's still way too early to give too much, to look too much into it. But I've certainly had some thoughts on the pairs. So I'm going to go through them quickly and just give you my quick thoughts. So the 2 Aarons, Aaron Cha and Aaron Tai. I actually messaged Aaron Tai afterwards. We sometimes have a little bit of back and forth. He's a funny guy, but he actually said that he was very nervous. That was the one thing that he said in that match. Understandably, Aaron Cha is such a superstar. He's Malaysia's probably best men's doubles player. And I think he felt the pressure. And I think this could be seen in the first game, the China Open, where they played against Gautama and Isfahani. They did improve in the second, but Gautama and Isfahani were playing well. And where the 2 Aarons are good in their respective partnerships is the net and the service situation. It just so happens to be an area where the Indonesians are also incredibly strong. It was a solid performance by the Indonesians, who won more of the net battles. And I think just the fact they're also very good in the serve situation, but to be very good in the serve situation requires that time with a partnership. You know exactly where you tell each other where you're going to serve, what you look for. You know all the patterns. You've practiced it. You drilled it in. You've had lots of experience with it in tournament play. And obviously the 2 Aarons don't have this. Was their first tournament together, so they weren't quite as effective. I think it was, on that note, actually a shame that the 2 Aarons couldn't play in Japan too and go into China with a bit more experience together. But I'm quite interested to see them. They're playing the Taipei Open. Quite cool. They're exciting. They'll be entertaining. But again, like I said, only one tournament. I can't really say much more than that. Manwei Chong and So Yik. Now, I'm not really too sure about this partnership because it seems to me like they're 2 rear court players playing together. Both of them can play the front of the court and both have developed it, but neither are natural there. And so there were times when they seemed to struggle. It seemed like So Yik took more of the front court mantle up. And I think had he not really stepped up this area of his game in the last year or so, that this pair would have really struggled. I think the fact that, as we know, I have said this countless times, men's doubles, I think pairs like Kim Won-ho and Seo who are so good in both roles, and even Alfian and Fikri, I think they're very good at the front, and have developed their rear court stuff that you can't just be a classic front court, rear court player. And I think the fact that So Yik has actually worked on that in the last few years with Aaron Char and got pretty good at it. Like I said, I think had he not done that, this pair really wouldn't work. Pardon me, sorry. In Japan, they lost to the Lee twins, and I do think Man Wei Chong started off a little casually. He was incredibly static. This is where So Yik took the lead. He went forward, and they did work themselves into the game, even winning the opening game. But all in all, they were too defensive, and I think we saw their front court limitations whenever they were second best at the net. When they were on top of the net, or in a 50-50 situation, they were okay, especially I think when So Yik was the one that pressed forward. But if they were second best, there's only so much improvement you can make. They're both not natural front players. It inevitably led to them being on the defense. And in China, I think it was a bit better, but the same sort of issues. Personally, for me, two front players can work. I think we've been proving that with Alfian and Fikri, but two rear players, I'm not so sure. I'm surprised they didn't try Aaron Char with Man Wei Chong and T Kai Wun with So Yik. I think that possibly that would have been a better combination to try. And then the last two pairs, T Kai Wun and Yap Roy King and Junadi Arif and Kang Kai Shing. I didn't actually see these two play in China, to be honest. I didn't watch their matches. But both of them lost to fellow Malaysians. And that was why I didn't watch it, because, I know one of the Malaysian pairs is an independent one, but I don't think you're going to see as much playing against fellow Malaysians, because they probably switched around and played each other so much that you're not really getting much of an indication. You want to see them playing against players of other countries where they're not so sure of the game, or maybe you've seen them play those other pairs before with their usual partners, and you can kind of compare. There really wasn't too much to go on. There is another question about the Malaysian men's doubles, but I saved that for the Q&A section. But yeah, no, I think it's no. I'll wait for that question. So following on with Malaysian men's doubles, I want to talk about Goh Nur Fei and Nur Azudin. There were a few more eyes on them on this leg of the tour because they had played so well in the previous leg, winning the Indonesia Super 1000, the last event. And in Japan, I felt they had a good tournament, reaching the semis and losing respectively to Kim Won-ho and Seo Seung-jae. I was further impressed by this Malaysian pair in Japan. Nur Azudin, I felt, was a huge difference when they won in Indonesia. He looked to be playing with more intensity, getting involved more, and more willing to maintain good pace. And I saw more of that in Japan. In fact, there were a number of times where I felt Goh Nur Fei went off the boil, and Nur kept them in and brought Go back up. I think actually Goh Nur Fei dipped in and out a little bit too much on this leg of the tour. He did it a little bit in Japan, in Indonesia, not too much. But what biggest difference I think here was Nur Azudin actually really kind of stepped up and took the lead role in the partnership. I even wrote after watching them beat Astrup and Rasmussen that Nur was looking good. Huge strides taken from Indonesia. It'll be a positive time for them. They'll be hard to beat, and they were in Japan. Yeah, like I said, I already kind of mentioned this, but I've written here that one slight criticism against them in Japan was that they did dip in and out a bit. I do think this was mainly Goh Nur Fei, but still they seem to go in bursts. Versus Chen Yi and Presley Smith of America, they went to 3 because they did shut off a bit. But then in the third, they absolutely rocketed through. So they were still making it through the rounds because when it really mattered, they were able to turn it on and their dips weren't for too long. However, this approach did come to bite them in the arse in China when they lost to Daniel Lundgaard and Mads Vestergaard of Denmark. They were in complete control in the first set. The Danes couldn't get into anything. The match was incredibly bitty. There was no rhythm. The service situation was pretty much where the match was won or lost. But in the early stages of the first, the Malaysians were completely on top. The Danes looked, I think, by the mid-game interval, almost completely like, what the hell do we do? And the Malaysians did come out incredibly focused. And then suddenly they weren't. The Danes did come out from that mid-game interval with just like, right, let's just go as fast as we can. Let's just make our serves a little bit more awkward. Let's vary it a lot. Let's take even more rhythm out and just see what can happen. And I think they did that well. And combined with the fact that Malaysians just got a little casual, they lost the first. Malaysians got it back in the second. And then the start of the third, they started very quickly. I think they went like 5-love up. And watching it, I felt there was no way back for the Danes. I felt that the Malaysians weren't going to make the same mistake twice, but they kind of did. The Danes, like I said, they did do some similar things. They were very on the serve. They took even more rhythm out, and it worked. But in all honesty, I think the Malaysians' casual play cost them, because they should have won that match in straight games. They should have won that opening game, and then they were on the better end, the slightly easier end, and then they won that second game pretty comfortably, and I think they should have been sending themselves into the next round. Yeah, I think the like I said, I noticed it in Japan, the dipping in and out, especially from Goh Nur Fei, and in China, I think it was just magnified. It was one of those matches that if you did dip, because it was the service situation that was so important, there wasn't really many long rallies. There's like a handful, and most rallies were like under 8 shots. You really couldn't afford to lose focus, because you could lose points so quickly. And sadly for Malaysians, that's what ultimately undid them. But I did see signs of it elsewhere, but it just was exacerbated in that match in China. Right, moving on. Women's singles. A few things to talk about here. Number one, I said it when I talk about women's doubles, and that was that the top seed, just like in Japan, this was Liu Tan withdrew in the women's doubles. Seong withdrew in the women's singles. She won her first match against Hina Akechi 6-9, and then withdrew, citing pain in her left foot. I did think we might see her play in China. I thought that if it was she still won 6-9. She was still playing clearly still playing at a pretty high level. But I thought maybe, okay, it's a little bit sore, my left foot. I'll withdraw, and because China Open is a Super 1000, it's a bigger event. I'll come back for that. But clearly, it didn't recover fully, and she withdrew from China as well. I don't know the extent of the injury. But it certainly did open up the women's singles a bit more. And whilst we didn't see a huge influx of new players at the business end, I'm sure for a number of fans, it did make things a little more intriguing. Lastly, before talking about the players that did well, sticking with Seong, I think it was a pretty solid choice. I think that's one thing that there's been many differences between if we go pre-Paris and post-Paris. We know that the Korean setup has completely changed with all the stuff that Seong brought to the table. I think one of the big changes, in all honesty, is the handling of Seong when she's got these injury issues. She played through severe knee pain in the build-up to Paris. And we've seen since post-Paris a number of times where, I can't remember what injury it was, but her withdrawing or not playing as many tournaments and having more of a focus on her health and long-term goals. And this is just another example of that. The injury clearly isn't like a major one that stops her from practicing, but probably does stop her from playing at 100%. And she's like, well, we've got the World Championships. I didn't win it last year. I want to make amends. And we've got the Asian Games as well. I want to defend my title there. And so clearly her, and I personally think it's going to be Park Ju-bong who's behind all of this, has gone, no, let's not play. You don't need to. You don't know. It's not going to affect your seeding position. It's, we know that you can just come in and play good if you're feeling confident. Let's rest. Let's focus on future tournaments. And I think that is really, really positive, because pre-Paris, this is the kind of injury that Seong would have probably got an injection or painkillers or just played through. So it's good that she's keeping one eye on not just the bigger tournaments, but just longevity and making sure that she doesn't make these little injuries into big injuries. So yeah, really, really good. So I've got a few players that I want to talk about. I have to, of course, and I know I got absolute buckets of questions on Instagram for this. I have to talk about PV Sindhu. In Singapore and Indonesia breakdowns, I spoke about Sindhu and how I felt she had taken a huge step forward, or a step back to her best playing days. She looked fitter, stronger, and just able to move well enough to play with the very best, and that was shown in her performances at both those tournaments. I was very curious to see, and I said this in his breakdowns, how she would take that into the next leg, which was Japan and China. Will she take that confidence forward? Will she progress her game even more, or was Singapore and Indonesia a kind of a one-off, and we revert back to kind of the Sindhu that we got more accustomed to over the last couple of years? Well, she showed to me and to everyone that she has taken her performances from the last leg and then some, as she was brilliant in both tournaments, but especially Japan, where she won the whole tournament, defeating numerous top players en route. It was her first title since 2024 and her first title of this level since she became world champion in 2019. She beat numerous top players. She beat Han Yue, Chen Yu Fei, and then she beat the home favourite Akane Yamaguchi in the final. I think some might say that she was helped a bit in the final by the walkover she got against Okuhara, and then Chen Yu Fei retiring midway through their semi-final. But in all honesty, Sindhu deserved to win, and that takes nothing from the level that she showed. Now, it doesn't take much, personally, to break down PV Sindhu's game. She's always had quite a basic approach, which I think is the best thing. She's not someone blessed with the skills and the finesse of your Tao Yings or Yamaguchi. She's not the best retriever of like she doesn't glide as effortlessly around the court as Chen Yu Fei, but she's always used her height really well. She centers her game around a really basic game, her thundering smashes, her punching clears, and working the long diagonals over and over and over. And she did all of that and then some in Japan. Throughout that tournament, her attacks down her opponent's backhands was so effective. It was almost borderline impossible for opponents to do anything but block it, and Sindhu followed up every single time. Even when I felt sometimes maybe she was smashing a little bit too much. It was at times where I felt that, I said down the backhand channel, a few players were standing there, but the power was so ferocious and it was so unrelenting, that there was just simply nothing that they could do. But whilst it is very a simple game, it does require great fitness, and that is something that has been missing until now. Sindhu looked strong last month, but in Japan and China too, she has taken it to another level. On top of a basic and effective approach, I saw further improvements in her defensive skills. She made herself much harder to outmaneuver. I feel Sindhu has improved her ability to twist and turn around the front court much better, and when she is punished on the long diagonals, she can handle that pressure much, much better as well, even able to exert pressure back from those weaker positions. I think one thing that Sindhu actually did really well, and it worked pretty well against Yamaguchi, was that she hit hard from the rear positions. So, I'm saying when she's, especially in a forehand, she's there, she can hit it hard, okay? What this does is if you play hard from those positions, your opponent doesn't have the time to do the creative deceptive stuff. So that can give you a little bit more certainty in what the next shot has. You take a little bit of time away. But to be able to handle that, you have to be fast and you have to be fit. Because obviously if you hit harder, you're giving yourself less time on the next shot. If you play a softer shot or a clear, you create a little bit more time, but I think you also give more time to your opponent to apply a more deceptive shot on the next one. And I think because Sindhu has improved her speed and her fitness and her physicality, that she can now do that and then get to the next shot. Whereas I think maybe at the start of this year, had she done that and they just get on it quickly, she would then be really struggling, and then she plays the softer one and then the opponent gets in. Now she can hit hard and then she can still get to that next shot at the front and still be able to maintain that pressure. For me, that was one thing that I noticed that was hugely different in her game. And like I said, it worked well against Yamaguchi because I think Yamaguchi is really good at punching shots, and if an opponent plays slightly loose one, she jumps on it really quickly or can apply more pressure. And I think the fact that Sindhu was able to like hit hard, and also from there she has the strength to play the cross clears and all that stuff. It just kept players like Yamaguchi a little bit more honest when she was in those situations. And I think if we go to the other side on the backhand, she's able to get around the head more and be in a slightly better position so that she can play a bit more consistently. You know, I think Sindhu, similar to Marin at times, sometimes a fast one on the round the head. They can obviously play from there, but I felt that sometimes those corners you can get a few easy mistakes out of those kind of players if they're slightly down or not feeling good. Sindhu wasn't giving as many away from there. And last thing that I'll add is that whilst all these things that I've just said aren't new, I did actually notice one new thing, and that was some actual. I said that Sindhu doesn't have like buckets of the skills like your Tai Yings and some of the other women's singles players. It's not to say that she's devoid, but one thing I did notice that I don't think I've ever seen her before is reverse slicing her kills, like coming in and then brushing across it. She's much more usually like a simple pokey player. So some of those reverse kills and pushes, I don't recall seeing it before, and I think that's something that Erwan Shah, her coach, has added in. So yeah, huge credit to Sindhu and to Erwan Shah. She's certainly going to come into the home World Championships with plenty of confidence, and I think people are going to have to look out for her. I think she has put herself into a big contender spot for a 6th world medal, which would be absolutely extraordinary. It was an excellent tournament for Sindhu. It could have been even better, as in China she had, I think, opportunities to get to another deep run. She had Chen Yu Fei in the second round, and she held 4 match points in the second game before losing. Chen Yu Fei then went on to reach the final, so that could have very easily been Sindhu could have had back-to-back tournaments, but I don't think that's going to knock her confidence too much. I think from what we saw in Indonesia and Singapore, she's brought that to Japan and China with a higher level. And I think with her experience at Worlds and having the home crowd on her side, yes, it adds pressure, but I think she might relish that, and I think she's going to make herself very, very difficult to beat. But yeah, in that match against Chen Yu Fei, I think credit to Chen Yu Fei to dig deep and found a way to win that second game. There were some misjudgments from Sindhu. Maybe she relaxed just a little bit before the end, but credit to Chen Yu Fei. And then in the third game, I felt Chen Yu Fei made it harder for Sindhu to fire off those huge smashes, which were working really well. Fitness did play a factor towards the end of the match. There was a few times where Sindhu was bent over double. To be fair, both players were on the floor at some points. But it does actually lead nicely onto a few questions I got, because after the match, I saw numerous reports of PV Sindhu and her post she put on X. In that post, she said basically the BWF didn't care about recovery, as whilst Chen Yu Fei got a full day off before her second round match, Sindhu only got 16 hours. Because the first rounds are played over 2 days, Chen Yu Fei played on day 1, and then Chen Yu Fei played on day 1, Sindhu played day 2, and then obviously they played again on day 3. So because Chen Yu Fei played on day 1, she had an extra day's rest. Now, this has led many to feel the scheduling was unfair, with some going as far to say it favoured the home player. So I wanted to give my thoughts on this. Now, for me, I'm not in full agreement with Sindhu on this situation. It's not to say I don't believe that recovery isn't important. I think just what needs to be said is the only reason they had differing recovery times was because Sindhu played the Japan final the week before. She was given an extra day before starting in China. So if you reach if there's a tournament with 2 days for first rounds, if you reach the final of the tournament before, you automatically play on day 2. Usually when it comes to day 1 and day 2, it's usually top half day 1, bottom half day 2. And so everyone is in the same boat. So I can't remember which half of the draw Sindhu and Chen Yu Fei on, but had Sindhu lost in the semis at Japan, they would have played each other, or they would have both played their first round matches on day one, and so forth. I hope that makes sense. So for me, and a little bit of irony, and it wasn't lost on me when I saw Sindhu's posters, the reason she has a reason to complain about recovery is because of a rule designed to give her more time for recovery. Okay, so, I'd also add to this, I didn't think Sindhu lost due to fatigue or a lack of recovery. You could argue the third set was determined by that. But, let's not forget she held 4 match points. She didn't look tired up until that point. She should have closed it out into 2 straight games. And then would she have still said the same things? I'm not so sure. I think because of that, some people have been quick to react in a way that says she undermines Chen Yu Fei's efforts, and that did come across slightly, I'm not going to lie. She may have lost the overall match due to fatigue, but she didn't lose the second game due to fatigue. I believe recovery is important, and maybe there is a case Sindhu should have played later on day 3 on the Thursday, but regardless, she would have always had less recovery time than Chen Yu Fei, due to a rule designed to give her more recovery time. So I don't think you can complain about recovery time when the reason you played later, you were already given recovery time from your efforts the week before. She didn't mention that. For me, it just seemed I wasn't in agree when I saw it. I didn't agree with it. They can, it's not to say that, personally, maybe one way would be, if for future, if this happens, is if, say, let's just use this as an example, Sindhu played the final in Japan, so she automatically has to play day 2. So her match and her first round opponent, their schedule was slightly changed. If it so happens that that match, so Sindhu's match, I can't remember who Chen Yu Fei played in the first round, but it was Nidara. Maybe BWF, you could say, well, because of this situation potentially happening, the match above that, or the match that Sindhu's match would have to play, should also move to day 2, so that they get equal rest onto day 3. Maybe that's something that could be different. So rather than just going, right, if you reach the final, you must play on day 2, also consider that who you play next, that match should also move to day 2, and then you move 2 concurrent matches that would have been played on day 2, they can be moved to day 1, as long as it all fits with the previous tournament. Maybe that's something as a rule change, but I still think that, like I said, the irony wasn't lost to me that Sindhu was complaining about BWF not caring about recovery, but the only reason that she played on day 2 was because they were trying to give her more recovery time. That wasn't lost on me. But anyway, moving on. Yamaguchi, she got to the final in Japan and won the China Open as well. 6th tournament played, 6th final in a row. That's just incredible consistency from my favourite player. She will certainly be a big favourite next month to win a record-breaking 4th world title, and possibly could also win an Asian Games title, which would be huge as it is being held in Japan. Now, for me, Yamaguchi certainly wasn't flawless in this 2-week period. In Japan, I didn't think she played all too well all week. Had numerous 3-game matches, which meant she was slightly weaker heading into that final, where I felt she needed to be at full fitness and rather fresh to compete with Sindhu and her approach. I know that Sindhu and her direct approach is something that, her height difference with Sindhu can sometimes be a factor, especially if Sindhu's on it. And I think even Yamaguchi admitted that she was a little bit too tired in that final and wasn't able to just find that extra few percent that would allow her to kind of handle the level that Sindhu brought. She also admitted to pressures of wanting to win at home and winning a record 5th Japan Open title, but despite being down, she still reached a final. And then to be disappointed and to be tired after Japan, to then go into China and win there, and do so beating 3 Chinese players back to back and becoming only the 2nd non-Chinese player to win 2 China Open titles. Absolutely extraordinary. I've got nothing but praise for Yamaguchi. In terms of, I think, some tactical things that she did quite well, I think in the semi-final and the final in China, I thought the punch clears and the drops that she used, the big court, so especially when she played the slower end, the faster end, she tended to especially in the semi, she kind of quickly gave up on that. I think she might put so much effort into the first game that she was just saving herself. She knew that the second game, I think after about 6-1, she looked like she'd given up on it. But from the slower end, the punch clears and the drop, so she really opened up the court through there. And then quick, yeah, that was it. She would punch clear and do the drop shot. And then if she punched it into the corners, and then Wang Zhi Yi or Chen Yu Fei played either a little bit too quick but not fast enough, and a little bit weak, Yamaguchi just jumped on it and moved them, just completely pulled them out of the court. Absolutely classic, just opening up the court, moving your opponent. And because she did it from the slower end, it was really difficult for both Chinese players to kind of control the next shot from the net. I think also against Chen Yu Fei, especially in the final, I loved her use of the cross clear. Her round the head clears, excellent defensive shots. It's an excellent defensive shot. It uses the drift well, because especially from the faster end, I think this is what she figured out between the semi and the final. It was in the final she won in straight games. I did think that we might see a similar situation in that final when she got onto the faster end in the second, that we might see a one-sided game. But she actually had a better game plan, and that was a big use of the cross-court clears. It's obviously a longer distance, so in the faster end, it's a little bit easier. It's an excellent defensive shot. It uses the drift, and it gets Chen Yu Fei stretched over a little bit. So, if you're playing, say if Yamaguchi on around the head, Chen Yu Fei is always going to be slightly on that side, so it moves Chen Yu Fei out, and then it's much harder for Chen Yu Fei to then play back again. So then Yamaguchi could kind of play the game onto one half, and then she could get a little bit quicker onto that shot, which then got her in control of the rally. Which then obviously allowed it a little easier from that faster end to control. So I think she played tactically really good. And then on top of that, I think, she didn't just overuse the cross clears, because then Chen Yu Fei would start to get on it quickly, but I think she added in other variations as well. Huge congratulations to Yamaguchi. Right, Chinese women's singles. 3 players, Chen Yu Fei, Han Yue, and Wang Zhi Yi, a little bit like the Malaysian men's doubles. I want to quickly go through those 3 players. Let's start with Chen Yu Fei. There was an injury concern to hamstring in Japan. She withdrew at 15-10 down against Sindhu. And I saw a number online, actually, of people saying that she withdrew because she didn't want to lose. Immediately I was like, no, I'm not sure on that. The China Open was the next week, which was a bigger focus. And let's be honest, at the World Championships last year, Chen Yu Fei rolled her ankle and played on and won, again in the semi against An Seong, and then even played the final. She isn't one to pull out easily. She's had many injuries this year, so I think she was just being overly cautious. And then also in China, she was in a similar position against Sindhu, where she was down, but yet she fought on and found a way to win. She really dug deep in China, actually, because I actually wrote in my notes that after what she withdrawn in Japan, I thought she might do the same, or she might lose early. She almost lost out in the first round, actually, and obviously saved 4 match points against Sindhu, so it almost came true. But I think after that, she actually got stronger, and actually I think she got stronger after the first game against Ratchnuk in the quarters. She looked outclassed by Ratchnuk in that first game, and then again, I thought that we might see this is okay. I thought, okay, this is the end of the road for her, but then she came back, took charge, got stronger, and then in the semi against Miyazaki, was in complete control. In the final, I did think she hit a bit of a wall. She didn't seem to have the same zip in her legs to punish as many loose shots or sustain the intensity for 4 or 5 shots, which was needed to put Yamaguchi away. But I think reaching the final in China under the circumstances was good. For Han Yue, I haven't really got too much to say. She really is struggling this year. She's fallen out of the top 4 and has only reached 1 semi-final all year. She had a decent match with Yamaguchi in China, but she's really struggling, and it seems to be slightly falling off. With China always been so good at producing talents, I wonder whether she can turn things around. Only time will tell. For Wang Zhi Yi, I think with An Seong's retirement, we usually say this was her tournament to win, or her moment to win. She often did before, if An Seong was knocked out or missed a tournament. that Wang Zhi Yi would usually come in, especially at the bigger tournaments, and win, but she was unable to do so. I think she got some key wins, though, in China, namely beating a bogey player for her, Sim Yu Jin, who was the player who beat her in Indonesia. But I think the big positive for Wang Zhi Yi was that the back issues she seemed to have in Indonesia didn't seem to be bothering her on this tour. When she lost Sim Yu Jin in Indonesia, towards the end, she was holding it back quite often. So I think this is a really positive sign, and I think we could expect to see a much better Wang Zhi Yi at the World Championships. The only thing is that maybe confidence could be a little low, which I see this in two ways. Might not be good for the Worlds because she's kind of struggled at the World. She lost to Sindhu last year. Has never done all too well at the World Championships. But on the flip side, maybe having slightly less expectations could take some of that pressure off, and it might help her. I guess we'll just have to see. She certainly needs to rebuild her fitness. In Japan versus Wardani and against Yamaguchi in China, I felt fitness played quite a key role. She simply couldn't sustain her level. And one of her huge strengths is her strength. Her and An Se-young physically. The other players, I think, are taking note and trying to do what they can to kind of recatch it up. I've spoken about that a little bit with Sindhu, but Wang Zhi and that kind of physical strength that she's got is definitely a little bit down, but that's understandable if she had suffered a back injury just last month. That's not enough time for her to get back to full fitness. But I'm relatively confident. I'm not saying I'm confident that she was going to do really well at the World Championships, but we're certainly going to see an even better and a fitter Wang Zhi Yi. And then last thing in the women's singles, I want to talk about Putri Kusuma Wardani, because after 35 matches, Wardani finally defeated a top 5 player when she defeated Wang Zhi Yi in Japan. And she did so by winning the third game 21-4. It's the first time in 6 years a player in the top 4 lost a match that heavily. It was a strange match. In the first, Wang Zhi Yi was in control. She was taking the net, accurate and punching the shuttle around. Even on defense, she was countering Wardani well. And I felt that Wang Zhi was looking really, really strong. In the second, I felt that Wardani then was just keeping Wang Zhi in check. Her defense in general got better. I can't remember which end. She probably was playing on the slightly slower end. So she was. So it was a little easier for her to punch into the corners. And she was playing much more accurately. Her forehand corner, her attack from there was absolutely phenomenal. And I think she had a really strong end. She was 17 all and then won 21-17. One other thing, I felt that whenever Wardani was given a slightly floaty straight net, so something that just popped up, she held it and flicked into the long diagonals or the deceptive hold straight. So she played the long angles really, really well. And in the third, like I said, I think Wang Zhi Yi was a bit dead and played lots of mistakes. But and Wardani did to Wang Zhi in the third what Wang Zhi did to Wardani in the first. Open up the court with amazing accuracy and pace. And yeah, I think Wardani was helped a little bit by Wang Zhi being a little bit off. Okay, but I think what was even stranger than that match against Wang Zhi Yi is that you'd think that Wardani would have taken huge confidence from this into her next matches. And while she did play really well against Yamaguchi in the semi-finals, winning the opening game to 9, and then she reached the China Open quarterfinals, it was in those quarterfinals that she put in like a really strange performance, and which is kind of what I'm trying to lead into. She lost to Miyazaki. She won the opening game and then lost incredibly heavily. She made lots and lots of mistakes, but what really kind of stood out to me was the lack of front court quality. I just praised her when in the third game against Wang Zhi Yi, she kind of flicked the long diagonals or hold the tight straight, and she did that against Yamaguchi in the semis, and she'd shown, I mean, it's one of her strengths is her skill and her touch. But against Miyazaki, there was far too many times where she just played like nothing shots. They were just floating. Lots of errors too. The lack of front court quality from Wardani started in the second game and just bled into the third game, and she just couldn't get it back. It was really, really odd. Some credit must go to Miyazaki, who kept her patience in a pace high and ready to pounce on flat lifts. She did what she needs to be done, but it was just kind of strange. Like the reason why I say it is that the way that she built into the match against Wang Zhi, and then for the next few matches after, and then suddenly that performance. I know we can all have those kind of performances, but it wasn't performance from someone that is looking to get into the top 4 or 5 in the world. But I think we can't take away, I think her win over Wang Zhi Yi, hopefully that will give her a little bit more confidence moving forward and having a little bit more belief that when she comes up against one of those absolute best players, that she can actually get over the finish line. Okay, last section, men's singles. I'm finally here and speaking for over 2 hours. A few little things to talk about in the men's singles. Of course, I must start with the Popov brothers, Christo and Toma, because they've had some absolutely fantastic success. We had Christo Popov win in Japan, and then Toma went, hold my beer, little bro, and then went and reached the final in Japan. The first French men's singles player to do so. So a really good 2-week period for the Popov family. But what makes it even crazier for me is that they've only been coming back to training 3 weeks ago. I know that's the case for Toma because he put it on his Instagram that he'd been taking some holidays, some vacation time. So I'm assuming Christo probably did too. So that's absolutely extraordinary that they were able to play at the level they did. Let's now look at them somewhat individually, starting with Christo. Last month in Singapore and Indonesia, he looked flat, didn't have many great performances, and I think I remember him saying that he hadn't taken proper rest or recovery after Thomas Cup, where he had some Herculean efforts and obviously just the huge up of France reaching the final, and I think that definitely showed. In Japan, especially, he looked much more ready to get back to action. I've said it before about Christo, but where he has made huge strides forwards is in his footwork efficiency and his ability to control tempo and inject speed at the right times, not just going gun-ho. When he was younger, he was just like, everything was on the line. He redlined everything, and he usually blew a gasket. It did actually give him some success, especially against players like Victor Axelsen. But inevitably, when he really came up against players in the final stages of tournaments, it tended to go against him. But I think another area where he's improved is what he does with the shuttle from the front of the court. The spins, the cross nets, the pokes, the prods, probing his opponents. I felt watching him in Japan, there was rarely a wasted shot from the front. There was no nothing shots. Every shot from the front court had a purpose. He's always looking to get ahead in rallies, to set up his good attack, and I think he does that well from the front of the court. And in Japan, for the most part, his attacking play was also very accurate. He was one of the only players for me. There are a couple others in Japan where, like I said, he was always looking to do something with absolutely everything. There was rarely any just nothing rallies. Now, I think what is interesting is that in China, he faced Lin Chun-yi, who he lost to. I'll talk more about him in a bit, actually. But one of the reasons I feel Lin Chun-yi won that match was because those front court shots and the quality and purpose behind them is also something that Lin Chun-yi is good at. And in the battle between those two in that area, it was in China Lin Chun-yi that won more of those battles. It meant that Christo was a bit more often than not on the back foot, which if you're forced to do so against Lin Chun-yi, and I thought Lin Chun-yi actually was, again, I'll speak to him about it in a bit, it's not a good place to be, especially if he's playing well and attacking well, which I think in China he was. So maybe also in China, fatigue, the efforts, if he hasn't been back to training for too long, possibly that 1 week in Japan just spent everything that he had and he didn't have quite the level. He definitely looked a pace down in China, but I think it was exacerbated by the way that Lin Chun-yi played against him. As for Toma, well, he had the dream run in China. The draw did open up for him with the defeat of Kunlavut Vitidsarn to Gemka, who then Toma played, and then Ayasheti lost to Nhat Nguyen. But you can only beat who is in front of you. And to be honest, in the semi-finals, he defeated the guy who won the last Super 1000 and someone who was playing well that week. Someone who came in fresh as well, having missed Japan, and that was Victor Lee. In that semi-final, he lost the opener and then came back and got stronger and stronger as the match progressed. Not just that, but on the difficult end, Victor really couldn't figure out what to do against Toma. He couldn't score easily against Toma. I thought Toma's defense, when he was on that slower end, was absolutely exceptional. He is tall, he is big, and he's got those double skills. I've likened him to Kenneth Jonassen, who had a very strong forearm and hand. And even from out wide, he could drive into shots and do this stuff. And I see Toma doing the same. And so not only was he able to get to Victor's shots, but he was able to drive it back or even play it back over him. And so it was hard for Victor to kind of capitalize on some good attacking play. I thought Toma's defense was looking really, really solid. And actually, another thing that was doing well, he took quite a lot of backhands, did Toma, but his backhand always just had nice zip to it. So he could use that as a corner to kind of conserve some energy. He played a very controlled game, very good basic badminton. So I think if you couple that with his little pokes and jabs, which I think Toma uses well, his size and his double skills, he did make life very awkward for Victor Lai. I think what also I found really interesting about that semi-final was in the third game at 16-13, Toma was leading in that third game. There was a real epic long rally, which Victor won, ending with both players on the floor. And I felt watching it could be really crucial. I think I remember Jun Steen saying the same too. And I think I wasn't alone in thinking that Victor just won the rally that might see him turn it around. But no, again, Toma really showed just how much stronger he was, and he closed it out. I think overall, Toma's defense was a huge turning point, and add to that, he played the nearer end, the faster end, so much better. He had a game plan, which basically was really go for it, with factors in his win over Victor Lai. When they were on the faster end, Toma could, I know you're helped by the drift in your attack, but Toma could actually get through, or he was able to then get up on the next shot up there. Whereas Victor Lai's attack's a little bit weaker, but Toma's defense, like I said, he could drive it back or lift it, and it was very hard for Victor to apply pressure. And he never really got into much of a game plan in that from that faster end. In the final versus Chou Tien Chen, it was a good match, but a few things that Chou did or was able to do easier than Victor was, and a few things Toma didn't do that I think resulted in the win for Chou Tien Chen. Number one, Chou Tien Chen had a plan for the faster end. Not in the second game, because he did lose very, very heavily, but in the third, he stepped forward and took the net. It's a simple solution, but the willingness to work hard was great. Absolutely pressing forward when he was on the faster end, giving Toma that little bit less time. It gave no relinquish to Toma and applying pressure, not letting him play the big court easily. So I think, again, another thing against Victor, Toma, when he was on the slur end, it seemed he had more time to be able to kind of play here, play there, play on the court. Whereas I felt Chou Tien Chen took that time away from Toma a little bit more. The second thing, and this is something I felt Toma didn't do particularly well, is he did play a bit predictably from the faster end. You had to attack more that end, but I felt Toma only played hard for large periods. Chou Tien Chen, for me, was very fast onto the front, but if he lifted, he almost like then say when Chou was from the slur end, he would be trying to get onto the top, onto the net, so he could then make life difficult for Toma. But if he was second best, if he lifted, spot where Chou Tien Chen's defending from, he's almost just inside the double service line, because Toma was doing lots of big attacks, and then Chou was able to then defend. And that's something that's I think Jill said, is that he's playing too much one pace. He needs to try and slice it. And by the third, Toma tried to do it, but he was doing it like padding it down. Like it worked, and he did it a few, but they weren't crazy effective or sharp. And maybe he didn't have the confidence to do that for numerous reasons. One, maybe just the lack of training time. You know, those shots are much more difficult to do under pressure. Maybe it was the fact it was a final and the adrenaline is high, which makes it even more difficult or more easy to play predictably. But for whatever reason, I think his attack wasn't as varied. And maybe that was also because against Victor, it was working quite well. He was able to come in up here, but because Chou was reading it, he was sitting deep and he was able to defend that little better, and Toma wasn't able to then win his, basically like Victor wasn't able to win his points against Toma. Toma wasn't able to win his points against Chou Tien Chen. And lastly, I think Chou Tien Chen got so much success attacking Toma's backhand. And Toma was trying to do the same, but didn't win as many points. There were even times when Toma was standing over there onto his backhand side, but Chou Tien Chen still did it, and it still worked. But regardless of whether he won or not, I think a huge confidence builder for the Popov Brothers. They are feeling good building towards the World Championships. And I think lastly, French badminton should be confident too, as if you add Alex Lanier's Singapore Open win last month, maybe France could win their first world medal in the men's singles. Next one, Shi Yu Qi. Now, I spoke about Shi Yu Qi in the last breakdown, and I've heard that there was issues with his shoulder. And in Singapore and Indonesia, he wasn't really able to hit full power. And even in Singapore, I felt he struggled to inject pace into rallies. On this tour, there were signs for me, maybe Shi Yu Qi could open up a little bit more, especially in China Open against Chou Tien Chen. But it was still quite clear to me he isn't feeling 100% in that shoulder. In Japan, I felt his first match against Yudai Okamoto, that despite not going all out, his slices were looking sharp and he was moving well and he controlled the game. But from then on in Japan Open, I felt he deteriorated a little bit. Against Wang Liang, he looked heavier and slower on court. His slices seemed a little bland. Brian has a bit more of an attack than Yudai, a bit more steepness, a bit sharpness. But Shi Yu Qi wasn't fully there. And then versus Christo, it started okay, a bit more like his first round, but then he just seemed to sit back and allow Christo to play. He didn't really try to exert any pressure from the front court. When I watched him against Christo, he's just sitting in the centre. He'll block it, sit in the centre, come forward, lift it, or play net. Rarely would he play it and then anticipate and take that half step forward to that a little bit quicker. There was none of that. He just was sitting back and just playing. In China, he reached the quarters, although both opponents did withdraw during his matches. And in the quarters, he faced Chou Tien Chen. I think this was actually Shi Yu Qi's best performance across the 2 weeks, but he just came up against an inspired Chou Tien Chen who was attacking like an absolute demon, shown by the fact that Shi Yu Qi was 12-5 up in the first and then lost to 14. I think Shi Yu Qi was a little bit stunned by that. Now, it was this match, actually, where I felt I saw some signs that Shi Yu Qi could open up a little bit more in attack, maybe feeling a little bit more confident in his shoulder. But I think, all in all, Chou Tien Chen's attacking game was far too strong. I think also on top of that, Chou Tien Chen just couldn't put a foot wrong. He had the Midas touch. There were no times where he'd smash and just stand there, like not following it, but it hit the line. It was just one of those games where if you're playing that and you have an opponent like that, you're just like, fuck you. There's nothing I can do. You're just having a purple patch today. All in all, I don't honestly know when it comes to Shi Yu Qi. He's quite a mysterious player. Never quite sure what he's thinking. He can sometimes look like he isn't trying, but he is. I don't know about his shoulder situation. If anyone does, please do add in the comments. And I also did wonder, like I did with many others, whether his training is more tailored towards the Worlds and Asian Games. It might explain why some matches I saw him looking pretty strong. Others he looked heavy and laboured. Some he looked like he was being very proactive, like against Cho, actually, against Yudai. But then some, like against Christo, where he simply just sat back and was just quite happy to play at a comfortable pace. I guess, like with everyone, we'll have to wait and see. Next, Kunlavut Vitidsarn. Result-wise, it wasn't a strong showing from the former world champion. Quarter-final in Japan and first round in China. But considering he couldn't play a month ago because of his back injury, Singapore and Indonesia, he played like 3 or 4 rallies. I think he'll take the fact he finished without injury and even got a decent win over Ayasheti as a huge positive. I think Kunlavut is a player that needs quite a big build-up to get big results. And so maybe we might see him peak later in the year. In Japan, he lost to Yushi Tanaka, who was playing supremely well. At times, I felt Yushi was actually the best player in the whole tournament with his explosive smashes, great sharp net, and overall game. I think just for him, he just needs to get stronger mentality, but I'm going to touch on him in a bit. Now, I did see a video from a channel called Get Good at Badminton saying Kunlavut played habitual shots, and he also played predictably in that match against Tanaka. I do agree, he did stick to things without thinking too much, but I'd also say a few of the shots they mentioned are ones you see a lot of players do. Cross lifts are something that's quite common, and I think serving to opponents is also into their forehand is more common than you think. Some players do vary it, and Kunlavut probably was guilty of playing the same serve over and over, but it's a serve that quite often you do see. I think players do serve into forehands because they're generally, although there's that, it's easier to read the deceptions. You play on someone's backhand and they're ready for it. It is a little harder to read the deceptions on that one. But personally, I think Kunlavut lost. I think he lost that match against Tanaka, not because he played predictably, but he just simply couldn't sustain the pace. He pushed hard and snuck the first, but he then faded. The opening stage of the second were hard, really grueling rallies, and Kunlavut dropped off. Credit to Tanaka, who attacked very well, won the areas where Kunlavut may have been able to steal some time, like the net, and he punished any loose shot with deadly accuracy. Kunlavut may have played some of those habitual shots or predictable shots, but look at the way that Tanaka puts them away. Even if Kunlavut had been on balance and played the right shot over the little deception, those shots still weren't coming back. There wasn't, in all honesty, I felt much that Kunlavut could have done on what his current level was. In China, he faced Gemka. Again, he didn't have the fitness, and often when you don't have that, it does leak elsewhere. I've talked about that before. You don't want to be thinking about your fitness. You want your full focus on the match. That's why I said earlier, if there's any doubts you've got within any department in your game, it takes away from the main part, which is how do you beat the opponent across the net. I think that could also explain some of the predictability from Kunlavut. And I felt he wasn't on top of the situations where he usually is if he is fully fit. In his match against Gemka, he lifted too easily. And again, credit to his opponent. Gemka played a decent match and attacked accurately in that. Yeah, so like I said, that could be what led to what Get Good at Badminton said in their video. But I think the videos are actually really interesting. They got good hooks and stuff, but sometimes it misses a little bit of the context. And I think we need the context that was missing in that video was the fact that Kunlavut was injured a month ago with a back injury that he couldn't even play 3 or 4 rallies. So we have to take that he's probably not fully fit. And when you're not fully fit, you're more likely to play predictable badminton because you're not thinking as your mind is on other things. But anyway, moving on, Victor Lai. I've already kind of touched on him a little bit. Victor obviously had a lot of eyes on him because of his historic win in Indonesia. He skipped Japan to focus on China, and I have to say he played another great tournament. The conditions in China were difficult, with one end being incredibly quick, but for the most part, Victor looked pretty good at controlling the drift. Reaching the semis, only dropping 1 game. That was the first game of the tournament, and in all honesty, it was a very close one. I think it was in extra points. Victor showed more of his developments that had been noted in Indonesia. He isn't just a retriever. He could also go on the attack. In fact, he could go direct on the attack as well as be a counter puncher as well. For me, watching the more I watch of Victor, he has a little bit of that Momota style to him, with fantastic retrieval skills, a good sense of the game, has good control of the shuttle in his basic game, and his attack, whilst not the hardest, has some level of accuracy. He isn't like Momota in all areas. Momota's shots back to the net were far better, something which I think cost Victor a little bit. But just the approach, happy to rally, good basic game, but can counter or even go on the offensive if the situation calls for it. I think with more time, Victor could be a player who can do well across all conditions. Fast, slow, drifty, neutral, absolutely everything. He did ultimately lose to Toma, and I have mentioned somewhat why, but I do think he struggled to score points against the Frenchman. This was especially the case when playing on the faster end, where I felt he couldn't open up the court as easily, and Toma had a little easier time at using the backcourt himself. But regardless, I think Victor will be somewhat pleased with the result. Another semi of the Super 1000 puts him in a great position heading into the World Championships. Talking of which, last year he broke onto the scene there, coming out of nowhere, had the underdog status. This year he will likely be seen as one of the favourites. Be interesting to see how he handles all that. But based on what I've seen, I think he has that quality about him where he seems good at handling that. He's quite a cool, calm customer. That's what gives me that Momota feel. He just has that confidence in what his game is. He knows what his style is. He's adding layers onto it as well. He just gives that vibe to me that when there's pressure, he's undoubtedly feeling it, but externally doesn't seem to show it. So moving on, Lin Chun-yi. Like many players, Lin Chun-yi has struggled with some injury issues. After winning the All England earlier this year, he has really struggled, barely played in the Thomas Cup and was heavily strapped. Ever since that strapping has been present, and Chun-yi has looked a shadow of his All England level. But I think we might be seeing the end of that, as what I saw on this tour was a Lin Chun-yi who might not be 100% fit or sharp, but definitely a Lin Chun-yi who is finally injury-free. His legs anyway, his shoulders always been heavily taped, but his legs had no taping, and to me, he looked injury-free. Just looks like someone, like a number of the players I talked about, that he's in a position to build back up. He's not He's not trying to get over injuries. I think he is over them, the lower body, and so now it's all about rebuilding it. He lost to Kodai Naraoka in the first round of Japan, and even in that match, even though he lost first round, it was another first round loss. I actually wrote this in my notes. Lin Chun-yi looks healthy again, but just not match fit. Defense weak, his follow-ups lack intent, and just not as explosively. Definitely on the right track now, but will it be in time for the Worlds? I'm inclined to say Asian Games instead. Needs more time and more matches. Confidence potentially taking a hit from losses. Naraoka was decent, did what he had to do, and made sure things were difficult for Lin. Definitely looked comfy given where Lin lacking. That touch slower gave Naraoka more time and more leeway. I think that last point, he wasn't able to be as explosive as consistently, and that just allowed Naraoka just to absorb that a little bit more. I think Lin Chun-yi at 100% would take that away from Naraoka and make it much more difficult for him. In China, though, I'd be more inclined, in my notes there, I said maybe that he might be ready for the Worlds. I'd be more inclined to say that he could be back for the Worlds. I still think Asian Games is where he could be at his absolute best, but he could be at a very dangerous level at the World Championships. And let's not forget, it's in the hall which he won a tournament earlier this year. I felt throughout the whole of the China Open in Chun-yi, you could show us what he is, showed us what he's capable of. That brilliant attacking game, great overall control and sharp skills. Just that his ability to sustain it wasn't quite there. I personally had him at about, compared to his All England level, 60 to 70%. At the All England, his attack was absolutely lightning, and whilst he obviously did have down moments within his run to the title there, he was able to play at that level insanely high. And in China, he showed glimpses of it, and when he did, it was spectacular, but just had to kind of pick and choose his moments a little bit more. So yeah, and I also said in my notes after he beat Lu Guangzhou, that winning a few rounds, if he could win a few more rounds, I didn't know obviously how far he'd get then, would be positive for him and would give him that confidence, because he has been losing pretty early. And I think reaching the semis, I think that's why he lost to Chou Tien Chen, and he had his chances to potentially win. He didn't look all too. He actually he doesn't really show much emotion himself. Like, whether he when he loses, he's quite composed. But to me he looked like someone who was quite content with winning the semis. Didn't get injured further. Seemed to find bits of his game that were good, and he won some matches. I think those things. I think he's thinking, yes, I can go back to training now. Got a month. I can build on that for the Worlds and obviously then for the Asian Games. So it's great to see him looking healthy again. Only time will tell if he can build in time for the Worlds. But I think Asian Games is a better target for his top game, his kind of game that we saw at the All England. Okay, couple more. Japanese success in Japan is what I've called this next bit, and that's because for the first time since the mid-1990s with Indonesian players, we saw 3 men's singles players in the semi-final of the Japan Open from the same nation, and they were all from Japan, and that was Kota Naruka, Yushi Tanaka, and Koki Watanabe. It was Koki Watanabe who reached the final after defeating Tanaka in a brilliant semi-final, but personally, I think it should have been Tanaka. I personally saw him as the better player. He just didn't quite believe in himself enough at the key moments, whereas Koki did. And I think for that, I do actually want to focus a little bit more on Yushi Tanaka. Everyone knows I'm a huge fan of his. Ever since I first saw him play some lower tournaments in Japan, I think he played Aoi Farhan, and that's how I got introduced to both those players. And I was like, wow, these two are fast, attacking, excellent badminton. And so, yeah, that's why I want to focus on Tanaka. I think it's clear that Kento Momoto, they're from the same club, and obviously Momoto is a coach there, but still plays, still trains. He won a tournament himself. He's still at a very high level, and I think that's clearly helping him a lot. I do think I said that that lack of self-belief in the crunch moments, that's something that Momoto was incredibly good at. Maybe it's something that Momoto could help Tanaka with, although I think those things, you can't really coach it. It has to come from you. You have to find your own way. But there's definitely one thing that I do think Kento can help Tanaka with, and that is his defense. And I don't mean that in the retrieval sense, but being able to use his defense to create attacking chances. And I wrote this in my notes. I'm just going to read it verbatim because I think it sums it up better than I could just trying to rejig it. I do feel Tanaka is lacking 2 things. the quality of softer attacks to match his fast ones. So what I mean by that is the reverse slices and the drops aren't they need to be at the same level as his faster ones. Again, that was something that Momota could do absolutely brilliantly. And the other thing is his defense being used to counter. He's fast, more often just gets it back. Following on from my defense critique of Yushi, probably why he can't win why he can't win just rallying or countering. He is someone looking to attack and create. So he's not really a counter player, Tanaka. Of course he can do it. He's not that low of a level player. But when he wants to go on the attack, he has to just go out, use his speed to get on quick on the net or to leap onto a slightly loose shot. I don't feel that he can sit in defense, soak up some of his opponent's pressure for a few shots, and then wait for his time for one weak one, cross it, and then get onto the attack. That kind of counter player, I think that's actually something that he could get a little bit better. This is fine, but adding the other on top would make him an insane player. Momota couldn't be better for that. I think Momota was, I think Tanaka's attack is better than Momota's was in terms of explosivity and ability to just like hit wondrous. But Momota was insanely good at countering. So if Momota can help Tanaka get a little bit better on defense and quality of it and being able to kind of open up the court with it and create counter chances, that I think is an area that Yushi Tanaka, on top of just a little bit more belief, could get into that next level up. And I think, quick side note, I think this was something that I'm talking about the counter defense that Christo Popov did so well against Koki Watanabe in the final. Now, of course, the most likely some fatigue on Koki Watanabe's behalf after such an epic semi, but I felt that Christo could use his defense to create. I feel Tanaka just isn't quite as good in that department. But what an entertaining player to watch. Two more. Nhat Nguyen. I have to talk about the Irishman. I have to give a big shout out to him because he had 2 great weeks himself. In Japan, he did beat Chou Tien Chen 19-6. And then in China, he defeated Li Shifang and Aya Shetty to reach the quarterfinals. That's a huge result for him. And in the quarters against Aya, he even saved 3 match points. And then in the semi, he played a really nice match against Toma and was leading in the third, but just didn't quite have the legs to win. It was hard to watch his attack get less and less effective, his body more and more tired, and just you can see the desperation and to slowly lose. Huge credit for Toma for sticking that one out, but it was heartbreaking to watch. I've been in that situation where you're in that attacking position and suddenly your attack's not working as much, and you can just see your opponent slowly get in. It's just like, it's hard to take. But I really love the tenacity from Nhat Nguyen throughout the whole tournament in China. It may have failed him in the semi, but my God, did it work for him throughout the tournament. I must say, I did feel Li Shifeng and Aya Shetty allowed Nhat Nguyen to control vast portions of the match, playing too passively, not trying to do too much back. But they still, both those players still did it in patches. And I think it's a credit to some of his development is that before, when they did, they probably would have won the match. But he was able to weather the storm whenever they did. I remember those portions where Li Shifang came at it. He was fist bumping. He was going for it. There's a few times when Ayash was suddenly starting to play his good badminton, and Nhat Nguyen weathered those storms, found a way through the other side, and managed to win. I think Nhat Nguyen is a great example of what Anders Andersen kind of alluded to before the tournament, where he said on their week there are numerous players who have chances to go deep or even to win. It really shows with players like Nhat Nguyen just how deep and how good some of the players even outside the top 20 are. And last one, I have to obviously talk about Chou Tien Chen. I've already spoken about a lot of his matches already, so let me quickly just add some other stuff about the incredible Chou Tien Chen. Winning this event beat his own record, has become the oldest winner of an event at this level. And by doing so, he did this by reaching the final. It's been 16 years of reaching at least one final every year, which is absolutely incredible. If you add to that, he's a cancer survivor as well. He is a real inspiration. What is also crazy is just how out of nowhere this result came. We all know Chou Tien Chen's a phenomenal player, but in recent tournaments, he has been struggling. I mentioned that he lost 19-6 the week before to Nhat Nguyen in Japan. He lost to a young Indian player at the US Open. Even losing early in a number of his last few tournaments, and then suddenly just to go and win the China Open. Absolutely incredible. And he played like a man possessed. His attack was absolutely phenomenal. It was like he couldn't put it for a wrong with attack at times. I do just wish, I mean, I've said this before, I wish that Chou Tien Chen had started playing this way 10 years ago. Because back then I felt in his earlier days he was a little bit too patient. But then again, at that time, men's singles was being led by that style. The Olympic champion was Chen Long, who epitomised that style. Lin Tan was still playing, and he had evolved this game to much more of a rally basic game. There was definitely that element to men's singles at the time. Even Kenta Momota played somewhat similar with that style. So I think that's probably why he was influenced by that. But it just shows that he's always had this capability of an attacking game. And I think last thing I'll say is he's always been overlooked for majors. Rarely when you talk about Worlds, Olympics, Asian Games, he's always there in the contention, but you always see him as not the guy who's going to win. And I tell you what, it could be the same again this year, even with this result. Although I think with the current state of men's singles, there is no clear favourite. No one can be overlooked. Finally, I have reached the end of all of the disciplines. I'm going to try and quickly go through some of your questions. I've just got enough time before I go out and coach. I've just timed it absolutely on the money. So, question number 1. What do you think about Chou Tien Chen's record-breaking oldest player to take a high-level BWF tournament run? What do you think helps him stay so fit despite the age? Do you think the 15-point system would help him extend his professional career even longer? So 3 questions in one. So I've already kind of answered the first question. Absolutely crazy good performance, and just phenomenal how it came almost out of nowhere. Like I said, we've always known what he is capable of, but none of his previous results or level. I actually did a post, I think, on him on Instagram where I said that Chou's always been someone who's played loads of tournaments, that maybe he'd played too many. Too much traveling, he was here, there, and everywhere, but it shows that you can't deny it when you're gonna. If I was him, I'd happily take 3 first-round losses at tournaments, even losing to some players lower ranked. If you then go and win the China Open, I think that's a pretty good trade-off. In terms of what helps him, he is an incredible professional player. I think nowadays you can't get away from that. But he takes great care of himself and has a really good support network. Victoria Cow does a lot of work to help him, both when they're on the court but off the court. I've spoken to Christian Luque, who with Zheng Siwei, they have an academy out in China, and Chou Tien Chen has travelled there a few times, and he said of how professional he is, it's one of the best. He doesn't see many players, and he's worked with quite a few, have that dedication that Chou Tien Chen has. In terms of the 15-point system, I think it could help him, but not just because of his age, but also his style. He is playing much more attacking, and as a result, with 15 points, he'll have to do it for far less time. So it could be quite effective. And I've seen some people say that Chou's starting to play this way because of that system, but I would say that he's been playing that way a little bit before we even knew the 15-point system was coming in. But yeah, it definitely could help him extend his career even further. My only thing when it comes to 15-point system is, yes, it's going to, I think initially we're going to see much more attacking games. In terms of extending careers, yes, it's less time on court, but the intensity and might go up. And so just because the volume has come down, if the intensity goes up in equal amounts, the potential for injury risk or to burn out is just as high. So I'm not quite sold on the idea that this is going to allow players to have longer careers. It might do, but I'm still a little bit dubious on that one. Okay, so now question 2. If you're tasked to reshuffle the Malaysian men's doubles teams, which players would you pair up to have the best shot at LA 2028? Okay, so I personally don't think I'd change anything. And I think Steen Pedersen actually alludes to this because Aaron Char and So Yik, they'd have a bit of a bad period at some points during this year. But then which pairs don't go through those moments? If we go back last year, they had a whole great run of tournaments and they defeated Kim Won Ho and Seo Sin Jae as well. They've won a world title together. I just think, maybe I don't know whether you need the change or not, but they're a great pair. Man and T, they seem to work well together. The problem is, I think when it comes to Malaysia men's doubles team, is that I'd quite like the two Aarons, or Aaron Cha and T Kai Wun. I think that could work. I'd actually love Aaron Cha and Goh Nur Fei, actually, but that's not going to happen. But this does mean that the other pairs you make, I don't really think work. I said I don't think Man Wei Chong and So Yik. I mean, they might prove me wrong, but I can't see them working as a pair right now. Not with their current styles and how they match up. So if you put Aaron Cha and T Kai Wun, you have to have Man Wei Chong and So Yik. So do you potentially make a really good pair, but then you've lost the pair? I'm not quite sure. I mean, you could argue that Man and T are doing okay, but not exceptional. So you're not really losing out too much there. I don't know. So for me, whilst I can't rule out Malaysia creating a crazy new pairing, I don't think I'd have changed anything. I personally would definitely keep Aaron Tai and Kang Kai Shing together. I think they've been showing great promise, great progress in some of the bigger tournaments. I saw it again in Japan. They just need a bit more time to grow together. I don't think, you could say you split them up like they did for them to gain more experience, but they're already playing at the biggest tournaments together and they're winning. They've beaten Ranky Reddy and Shetty. I can't remember who they beat in Japan, but they had a couple of good wins there. They saved multiple match points. Why can't I remember? It might be like Chen Yang and Li Yu, or a world finalist. They're there, and I think they work really well together. So personally, if I had to reshuffle, I do think Aaron Chai and T Kai Wun are good, or potentially the two Aarons, but I would be more inclined. But then that does mean that I don't think like I said, you might create a crazy pairing, but I can't see T Kai Wun and Aaron Chai being better than Aaron Chai and So Yik, and then what Man and So create aren't going to be. You're not going to create two great pairs. I don't think you're going to have two great pairs. You could potentially have one even better pair, but again, Aaron Chai and So Yik, they've been together for, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I personally, it's a long way of coming back around. I wouldn't have changed anything, in my opinion. So, problematic back-to-back China Open playing conditions, the drift. What's your take on that? In China, very fast drift one end. Very difficult to play, especially for the singles players. I think the solution to this, you're never going to get rid of drift in these big arenas. It's always going to be there. Shuttle's very light and, different air currents, and you need AC, especially when you're in Asia, otherwise it'd be intolerable. I think there's always been the case to just you change ends more often. Every half game you change. So first end, then you change it, say it's going to be at 8, and then at the end of the second end you stay that end and you change again, and so there's just more changes. So a bit like we usually see in third games where you do have to change ends. You have really competitive matches because people are like, I need to get the lead on the good end, or I need to minimize damage on the bad end, and do I go all in or whatever? Which end do I choose? I think there'd be much more interest, because ends, to me, in badminton are almost important as, say, serving in tennis. I think we just need more changes. But imagine in tennis, like, it's the equivalent of just going, if you keep winning your games on your serve, you keep serving. It'd be very one-sided. But you'd have a lot of one-sided matches. Or if I say, like, in tennis, each set, for one set, you had to one player served the whole set, and then in the second set, the next player served, and then in the third, you switched. Can you? That's the equivalent, I think, in badminton. So I think just changing it more would be a little bit better. Can PV Sindhu beat An Seong, since she's already beaten the world number 2, 3, 4, and 5? Wang, Akane, Chen Yu Fei, and Han Yue. I believe she can, and she believes she can. Sorry, and if she does, then what am I to say? Otherwise. But yes, I think on a day Sindhu would have a good chance. She showed in Singapore and Indonesia she can compete and get close. I felt her level in Japan and China was even higher, and her height and powerful attacking game would be hard for An Seong to deal with. It would certainly be something new for An Seong to deal with. She hasn't played against a player. There isn't anyone else like Sindhu on the World Tour. Someone who has that height, who has that power, that direct approach. We have, you think about the players that An Seong currently has to compete most often not in the crunch matches. Yamaguchi, it's like a foot shorter and plays much more of an open court game. Yeah, she has a good attack, but it's not thunderous. Chen Yu Fei only just really recently started to attack a little bit more, plays much more of a rally style. Wang Zhi Yi, a little bit more attacking than Chen Yu Fei, but not blistering. Han Yu Wei possibly, when she's at her best, has an attacking game, but there's not really a player like Sindhu. So I think if Sindhu gets her level up close to what she was before, she'd be something new. Something could be a bit awkward for Seong. I do feel that Sindhu would need to be less direct than she was against the others, against Seong, because Seong is one of those players that's very good at figuring things out, and she'd be able to kind of come up with a counter solution. It's not to say the other players can't, but I think Seong's just a little bit better. It's kind of what makes her stand out. So I think Sindhu would need to use her touch and variations a little bit more. What's your opinion about Ranky Reddy and Shetty ahead of the World Championships? My only real thing is it's just a shame that shoulder injury to Ranky Reddy has flared up again. I hope it's not too bad, that they can play at the home Worlds. I think they're going to play regardless, but how effective they can be, it's a real shame because of how well they played from the Thomas Cup onwards. I said in Thomas Cup, that's where they, I think, had a mini breakthrough. And then they carried that into Singapore, where they were absolutely phenomenal and won there. It's just a real shame that they haven't been able to press that forward, that injury concerns have come up against. Sending my best wishes to both of them. Do you think the Koreans, this is Kim Won-ho and Seo Jae, have to change anything now they have started to lose more? Personally, no, I don't. I think, like all of the pairs, they need to continue to improve their game day in and day out, keep getting everything better. And I saw a post from Kim Won-ho saying that's exactly what they're going to do, and that's it. Maybe they could really develop their service situation a little bit more. But like I said, they lost because they came up against very good players playing extremely well. And I've mentioned it a few times that Seo Jae did seem a little bit off, but I have no doubt that he'll bounce back. They are yet, in my eyes, to be beaten really, really convincingly. The Japan final was about, I think, as close as it came to being ultra convincing. But no, I don't think they have to change all too much. They've got very good all-round game. Maybe they can just, improve little areas. I think if there was one service situation that they're good, but they're kind of a bit more Korean in that respect. They don't really apply a crazy amount of pressure, and I think they both have the skills where they could do. But yeah, no, they cover most of the bases, and I think recently, I think Seo Jae is still, I don't know, refinding something. He just looks a little bit off. Maybe he's, I don't know. But no, in Crux, I don't think they need to change anything. Okay, last question. I'm going to just finish up here. Who's your favourite player in each category? I thought something that isn't about Japan and China. Favourite players. Okay, men's singles. Again, it's difficult across all of these. I've got one definite, but these are the ones I've gone with. Men's singles, Kunlavut Vitidsarn. I just love his technical skills, and he just makes me kind of like really enjoy watching him play. I always liked watching those kind of players that make the game look so easy, and Kunlavut's one of those. There's plenty of men's singles. Women's singles, everyone knows it. Akane Yamaguchi. Men's doubles, Kim Won-ho. I just think he has. I just really like watching him play. He's not the flashiest. There's other players that I like maybe more for like the creativity and the skills, but just I don't know. If I see Kim Won-ho playing, it doesn't matter who he's partnering, whether it's in a big tournament or in a Korean one. I just like watching him play. Women's doubles, that's a difficult one, but I've gone with Kim Hee-jong. I think she's just, the more I watch, the more I really like her. I wasn't sold on her completely at the start, but the more I watch her, the more I appreciate the shots that she did, and she earned a lot of respect from me when the Uber Cup final, when she was playing like 90% of the shots and held it together and hung tough. And then in the Japan Open final, she was absolutely incredible. And mixed doubles, I've actually picked Goh Nur. I think I said this before. I really like his approach, and I was so happy with how they played in China, how he approached his matches, the intensity gone up a bit. Something I really like to see from him. And yeah, he's just got. I always quite like watching Zhang Jun growing up, and I've always been a big fan of Yuta Watanabe. He would be another player that I'd possibly pick in the mixed. And so the fact that I said that those two players, Goh Nur is almost like an emergence of those two, I don't know. I quite like watching him when he's in full flow. But so those are my favourite player in each category. But I wouldn't say, other than Yamaguchi, they're not really 100% set in stone. There's a few others. I like watching a lot of players, but if you force me to pick some, then they're the ones. So, guys, that is it. I have been speaking for 3 hours. I am absolutely fucked. Whether this video will be 3 hours, I might cut out a few things. I probably waffled on a little bit too long. As always, thanks for watching, and as always, feel free to discuss anything I've spoken about in this video, add your own thoughts, add more context. There's always things that I'm missing. that might give answers to certain situations. You can disagree with me, you can agree. I don't always remember everything that I've said, especially in this one because I've spoken for so long. It was quite difficult doing 2 tournaments because when I come to, obviously I watch all the matches, write notes, and I try to be as detailed as I can to remind myself. But there's so much badminton, it's so easy to kind of slightly semi-forget what really went on because you're taking in so much. There's no way you can remember absolutely everything. So, feel free to contest me and talk to me about it. But I hope you enjoyed listening in or watching. I haven't decided how I'm going to edit this one. I might keep it really basic and raw just because it's so long. And I've got other big projects in the thing, which I can tell you about now. I can confirm it. Firstly, I'm making a really long video on the history of the Thomas Cup rivalry between Indonesia and Malaysia. I'm about a third of the way through the edit on that one. I'm going to pick it up once I finish this. I've just got confirmation this morning that Victor Lai has agreed to be interviewed by me. So we're going to talk about his first year on the World Tour from the Worlds last year and how he's feeling going into the Worlds. I might make it into a produced piece, or we'll see how the interview goes. We might just have a slightly edited interview. I think that'd be really, really cool. I'm obviously going to do a prediction video on the World Championships. There'll be a breakdown of the World Championships. I'll be doing some TikTok lives during the World Championships for BWF, and I'm also part of BWF for doing a new, almost like a punditry talk show after the finals day of the World, and I am going to be one of the pundits there. So it's going to be an incredibly busy month or so, and I'll also be creating content on Instagram, creating videos for BWF from the TikTok. So mentally busy. Another reason why probably the edit on this video will be a little more basic than usual, but don't worry, for the next ones they'll be back up to the high class. But I haven't decided on that yet. We'll see. Anyway, guys, again, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel and you like what I'm doing, then feel free to hit the subscribe button, like, share, comment. It helps the channel, helps me. But all in all, if you just watched it and you do nothing else, that's also cool. I'll see you very soon in the near future.